Chapter 1387. The dry land, the howling wind. The atmosphere was scorching hot, devoid of any signs of life. What did not match the atmosphere was the team's atmosphere. Wow! Ha ha ha! The team members all screamed and jumped in joy. If it was any other team, the most common method would be to send a strong professional, preferably a defensive warrior, to take the Hellboar's charge head-on, then drag it into a battle of attrition, slowly whittling down this thick-skinned demon boar. There was no other way. Creatures that had been demonized were generally very strong. But now, there was a newbie rider, a big shot, personally controlled by Duque, Mark Dooku. That was to turn something rotten into something magical. Unless it was an undead creature, no one would be able to endure tearing off a leg while sprinting at high speed. The hell boar, which only had 3 legs left, screamed in pain. It struggled madly, venting the rage in its heart, trying to use its hooves and horns to kill any creature that approached it. If this was a mission issued by Honor Castle, they would probably have to fight a fierce battle to take care of this thing, but they had a more important mission. Mantis shrimp, let's go. Duque patted the red bug mount he was riding. The insect let out a low hum, then moved its 4 sharp and long legs, and ran away. Ha 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 ha. Awesome. Thomas and the others laughed and followed. The Hellfire Peninsula was a hellish place, a world where the strong preyed on the weak. If they left this 3-legged boar that weighed more than 2 tons here, it would not live for long. Moreover, this place was not far from Honor Castle. The guards on the guard tower had already seen this scene. Just because Duque and the others did not accept the mission didn't mean that others did not. As a matter of fact, there were already other teams eagerly rushing out to take advantage of the situation. Thomas and Duque did not care. The group of people swaggered off. The bug mount was very fast, over 40 kilometers per hour. But because of the strange curvature of the bug's legs and multi-joint shock absorption, it was not as bumpy as a horse. Not long after, the towering Honor Castle behind them disappeared into the horizon. A day later, the outermost guard tower in the southwest of Honor Castle was also left behind. The team had completely left Glory Castle's territory. Yeah, Thomas used a very standard charging movement while holding a lance that was over 5 meters long in his hands. The sharp spear had accurately pierced through the head of a steel-toothed marauder while moving at high speed, and the rather tough head of the marauder directly exploded like a rotten watermelon. Purple blood splattered in all directions. At the same time, the center of the spear that was supposed to slow down the momentum of the knight and the lance exploded. Let's go. Thomas did not stop and called for everyone to continue the assault. This insect also had a 4-legged pedestal-like base. Its lower body was very similar to the Kiraji insect people, but its Magata-like upper body was abnormally ugly. However, its mouth full of buck teeth was not just for decoration. Duque had personally seen an Alliance knight get his upper body bitten off less than 20 meters in front of him. Please note that the entire upper body was bitten off together with the 5 mm thick plate armor. From another aspect, this reflected that Thomas's shot was quite exquisite. For a giant insect with high speed and agility, he could still change the direction of the spearhead while charging at high speed along with the head of the steel-toothed marauder. This skill was like stabbing a matchbox with the spearhead at 60 kilometers per hour. It was amazing. Should it be said that he was worthy of the title of Highland Knight? Along the way, there were no hordes of monsters, but there were still all kinds of losses. 3 Kiraji insect mounts had their legs broken. Because they had just set out, their supplies were still quite full. They could only move the most important supplies, abandon the excess goods, and let the 2 insects fend for themselves. 2 cavalrymen from Lordaeron were ambushed by a void demon. Half of their bodies were swallowed, and there was no need to pull them out. Only half of them were left on the spot. Duque used a round of arcane missiles to finish off the void demon, which could be considered revenge. After spending 3 days, the team arrived at the thorny path. Looking at the scene, almost everyone frowned. Isn't this too dangerous? Thorns were thorns, yes, but the roots were huge thorny plants that needed two people to wrap their arms around. It was a nightmare. The only path was an arched passageway in the thorns that could accommodate two carriages side by side. This was the so-called path. In theory, this could lead to the Taraka forest, but no one knew what was in this path, or if the path would become smaller and smaller after entering. In the end, they were tragically stuck inside, unable to advance or retreat. Thomas used his spare knight's spear to poke at the thorns, and found that the spear was not sharp enough. If a person were to collide with it, gulp. Everyone could not help but swallow their saliva. Findlay, can you do anything? Thomas called out to a night elf. As a member of the Cenarian Expeditionary Force, Findlay's swift spear was specially transferred here for this mission. This elite druid looked at it, carefully sensed it, and shook his head. No. The land here is full of corrosion and decay, my power is not enough to affect the land here. Not to mention these thorns that have been here for at least 1,000 years. Thomas looked at Duque again, and Duque also shook his head. These hardened thorns were quite resistant to fire even if they were dead. If Duque's main body was here, he would have flattened it. Finally, he looked at the sky, and soon Thomas gave up. There were still many flying beasts wandering in the sky. They circled back and forth, gauging each other's strength. From time to time, a raptor would suddenly attack another, and then feathers, blood, and even organs would fall from the sky. The prize for the winner was the corpse of the loser. The Alliance tried to send a team of griffins over, but only one griffin knight returned alive, and he died not long after. Let's go in. I'll go first. Shaking his head, Thomas took the lead and rode the worm into the thorny path. The dense thorns quickly blocked out all external light. Even with a torch in hand, they still had the vague feeling that they would die the next moment, and be impaled on the thorns. This was a path that no one had used for at least 10 years. If not for the fact that most of the thorns had died due to the decay of the land, such a path would have long been covered by plants. Even so, the team was still extremely careful. The only fortunate thing was that Duque gave way to a dozen fireballs. The team formed a long snake formation around them, allowing the light to be slightly better. At this moment, Thomas, who was at the front, suddenly heard a scream coming from a place further ahead. Someone was attacked. Chapter 1388. There were people in front of the thorny path. Thomas's first reaction was that it was impossible. Before he left, he had already confirmed that his team was the only one sent by Honor Castle. Now, the main force of the Alliance was besieging Hellfire Citadel under the leadership of King Varian, and no matter how far the Alliance scouts went, they could not pass through Zangermarsh, which was further west of Hellfire Peninsula. Now, the entrance to the swamp was filled with a thick poisonous fog. Before the Cenarian Expeditionary Army's druids purified the fog, no one could pass through. Could it be, Drenii? Duque finished Thomas's words. Perhaps this was the only explanation. The situation in the Outland was quite chaotic, and the major forces were intertwined with each other. Kale, that must have sat on his private phoenix and brought his underlings along the way, flying to the northernmost stronghold of the storm to help the Drenii guard their home. In the southern Taroka forest, he threw a team of his own there, and they directly became Shotrath City's astrologer. That was it. Although the Drenii would not be completely wiped out, what could they do with such a scattered force? In the center of the Outland were the two pits of Hellfire Citadel and Zangermarsh, which blocked the way. What made the Alliance angry the most was that Thrall did not control his subordinates, or rather, those guys had been harboring evil intentions for a long time. Kargath Blade Fist, this guy who died in the dark portal of Azeroth in this life and was resurrected by Sun King as a forgotten warrior hero, actually rebelled and announced that he would accept the power of the Burning Legion as an undead. He also regained control of the Shattered Palm clan and ran to the Shattered Hall of Hellfire Citadel to become the boss. Thrall was exasperated and turned to attack the Shattered Hall. Other than Kargath, there was also the chieftain of the Blood Ring clan, Kilrog Deadeye, and the chieftain of the Bone Gnawing clan, Harken Cranium Splitter. In this life, they were killed in the Dark Portal and were also resurrected by Sun King. Like Kargath, they had also served Zul under Jaden's control. After being resurrected, they did nothing until they returned to the Outland. Only then did they reveal their ferocious fangs and raise the flag of rebellion. Unlike Kargath, Kilrog and Harkan were nowhere to be found. Duque suddenly had a feeling that the situation in front was related to these two chieftains who had run off. Charge! Thomas jumped down from the Zerg and raised his, excellent, shield up high. He drew his one-handed sword and rushed to the front. Then, with the illumination spell that Duque cast on his shield, he managed to distinguish the things in front of him and moved as fast as he could. Don't come over. Don't come any closer. A sobbing voice came from ahead. It was a female Dreenii. Thomas and the others didn't understand, but Duque heard everything clearly with the help of the translation software. That's right. It's a Dreenii. Duque's words made Thomas advance even faster. Thomas carefully placed the upper part of the large kite shield on his visor, revealing only half of his helmet. Using the gap in his helmet, he tried his best to look into the distance. He was close. He was close. It was getting closer and closer. Thomas brought Duque, Findlay, and a few other experts and rushed over first. After running for about 3 minutes, they saw their target. How should I put it? The current situation was rather comical. There were 2 huge and twisted vines, and in the narrow gap between the 2 vines, a blue-skinned Dreenii girl squeezed herself in. She seemed to have used a hammer to smash the small thorns in the middle of the vines so that she wouldn't get hurt and could hide from the pursuit of the 2 steel-toothed raiders. However, even though the 2 frenzied raiders couldn't squeeze into the narrow gap between the vines, they still used everything they had to attack the Dreenii girl. Their sharp claws kept going in and out, scratching the inside. The gap wasn't very deep. Even if the girl squeezed in with all her might, she still couldn't avoid the sharp claws that reached the end. Her butt happened to be facing outwards. Because of their body shape, the Dreenii's butt was more perky. As a result, the girl's butt suffered and was scratched by the sharp claws again and again. The fresh blood stimulated these mutated monsters, and they seemed to become even more violent. Duque was the first to make a move, using the old trick of Calm and Mind plus Flame Blast. No matter when it was used, it was always high-end and classy. The sudden burst of light frightened the 2 steel-toothed darters. The one in front tried to dodge to the right, but in its haste, it was pierced by a large thorn spike. In the next moment, it turned into a barbecued meat skewer. Of course, no one would want to eat the barbecue meat of the steel-toothed raiders. Originally, the other raider wanted to run, but Findlay directly smashed Starfire on the raider's head, which instead aroused the ferocity of the beast. It let out a sharp cry and rushed over recklessly, just in time to meet Thomas's charge. Bang! With a loud noise, Thomas directly slammed its whole body into a thorn, and a dozen sharp thorns pierced its body from behind. Even so, it was still fine. It twisted its body frantically, trying to use its claws to kill Thomas and drag him down with it. How could Thomas, who was already prepared, give it this chance? Almost at the moment when Charge hit the target, he immediately activated Counterattack Windstorm. The raiders' fierce attacks, which were as dense as raindrops, were all withstood by the thick fine shield. With the support of the warrior profession's unique fury, Thomas made an attack that exceeded the limits of his normal body. The long sharp sword seemed to turn into a dagger, quickly and ruthlessly stabbing into the raider's abdomen. 1 slash, 2 slashes, 3 slashes, a total of 20 slashes, almost turning the raider's entire abdomen into minced meat. The 2 beasts died, and the atmosphere immediately eased. Looking at the humans standing outside, the Dreenii girl was still in a state of shock. It's okay. Please don't be afraid. We are Alliance soldiers invited by your leader, Willan, to Shotrath City. Duque opened his mouth and spoke in the extremely pure Dreenii language. This made Thomas and the others quite envious. There was clearly more than one hero who saved the damsel in distress, so why was Mark Dooku the only one to claim credit? Helplessly, other than him, no one else knew Dreenii language. You are, humans? Unexpectedly, the dreamy-eyed girl actually knew human common language with a thick accent. It was a little awkward, but they could still understand it. Everyone, including Duque, immediately realized they had picked up a treasure. Yes. We are humans. That's right, who taught you the common language? Those blood elves? Astrologer? Oh. Yes, Lord Willan instructed me that in order to better communicate with the human-led alliance, it would be best for me to learn the common language. These days, I have been studying very hard, and it seems like it has come in handy. As the dreamy-eyed girl spoke, she bared her teeth and crawled out from the gaps of the vines. Chapter 1389. On the surface, she was covered in blood and was in bad shape. Duque could tell at a glance that the girl was very lucky. They were all superficial wounds that could be healed with a healing spell. Unexpectedly, just as Duque was about to call for a priest, the girl actually started healing herself with holy light. Oh, and a priest? Taking advantage of this moment, Duque sized up the dreamy-eyed girl. The girl had a figure similar to that of a human female, slim and slender. If it wasn't for the faint lines of her biceps on her arms, one would probably think she was a young lady just by looking at her silhouette. Her light blue skin glowed with holy light, and the girl was bathed in a holy aura. Although in Duque's eyes, this level of holy light was still very shallow. She had two S-shaped curved goat horns on her head, and below her knees were recurved hooves that were a little unthinkable for humans. For balance, the girl's body also seemed to have become curvy in both the front and the back. There was no gorgeous clothing. The dreamy-eyed girl was dressed like a typical commoner girl. The white linen top only covered her well-developed outland peaks. It seemed to be a typical off-the-shoulder outfit for ease of movement. The top that went from below her ribs to her neck made her neck look even more slender. A pair of leather pants that should have been brown had now turned dark red due to the blood staining them. She carried what in theory was a short warhammer in her hand, but in Duque's eyes, it was just a wooden stick and a metal lump. Duque noticed that there was no blood on the head of the warhammer. There wasn't even any blood left behind. A rookie on the battlefield for the first time? Duque really didn't know why Wayluan would send such a rookie to die. In the chaotic outland, it was enough for her to die 100 times. But no matter how he looked at it, this guy's luck was EX+. If she had the ability to come to the thorny path alone, she actually ran into the once-in-a-century Alliance advance team. Excuse me, can you please turn around? I. The dreamy-eyed girl's face was red. While Thomas was still in a daze, Duque had already come to a realization. She felt that her buttocks had been pierced by the flying man's sharp leg. Now that she was going to heal herself, it was really indecent to be injured there. Duque thought for a moment. Seeing that this guy wouldn't have a high-end item like a storage space bag, he directly handed over a piece of canvas. Thank you. The girl's face turned even redder, like a freshly steamed prawn, and she quickly took the canvas. A few minutes later, Thomas met up with the rest of the army, and the dreamy-eyed girl's wound was also healed. Seeing the large canvas patch on the girl's butt, Thomas, the silly goose, suddenly came to a realization. The girl was quite clever with her hands, because Duque also saw a hole above her butt. The edge of the hole was even smoothed out, so that the dreamy-eye's nearly half-a-meter-long blue tail could be seen. What a nimble tail. It wagged and wagged, bending left and right. Duque couldn't help but think of when he was taming dragons. Sometimes, he would get Onyxia in human form to give him a red tail that was proportional to a human's body for him to rub. Every time he saw the strange dizziness on the black dragon princess face and heard her moans, Duque would feel very satisfied. This was like stroking a cat, addictive. Suddenly, the dreamy-eyed girl screamed, attracting everyone's attention. Only then did Duque realize that his hand was cheap. He actually reached out to grab her tail and rub it. Sorry, I was too curious. Is this the first time you've seen a dreamy-eye? Yes. Duque lowered his head. My companion didn't mean to offend you. We're actually all very curious, Thomas hurriedly explained. No. It's okay, it's not your fault. But please don't touch a Dreenie's tail so casually in the future. They usually get angry, especially males. The girl lowered her head. Then, the girl took a deep breath and raised her head. There was a look of self-encouragement on her face. Even though there was still fear in her eyes, she tried her best to encourage herself and clenched her small fists. Please forgive me for being flustered, I've never killed anyone before, large creatures. My name is Imriel, and I'm Karabeur's apprentice. Are you the vanguard sent by the Alliance? Looks like the holy light is really on my side today. Then I'm willing to go with you. Let's go to a safe place first. Hearing this signature introduction, Duque Karazhan, who knew how many light years away, felt as if he was struck by lightning. There was only one voice in his mind, what the heck? It's actually Hooves. How is this possible? As for having the same name, that was impossible. Among the Dreenii, their mother of holy light would never give them the same name. In Duque's mind, there were 100,000 rhinoceroses galloping. It was as if every rhinoceros was grunting in a strange voice, F***ck your lungs. F***ck your kidneys. If all the major events that Duque had experienced before basically overlapped with the historical events in his mind, then it would match up. Then now, this matter was definitely a mess. According to the original history, this Dreenii girl Imriel, who was affectionately called Hooves by countless players, would only appear in the 6th version of World of Warcraft, King of Draenor. Normally, that would be at least 30 years after the Dark Portal. Why would she appear at this time? No. The Dreenii's lifespan was already extremely long. Didn't you see that the 3 leaders of Eridar from 25,000 years ago were still alive and kicking? Didn't you see that even after 10,000 years, the Eridar twins were still as beautiful as flowers? If Imriel lived for 8 to 10 years, it would be equivalent to 2 to 3 days for humans. Regarding this deviation in history, Duque was convinced. I'm Thomas Faddock, a warrior, the captain of the advance party that the Alliance sent to Shotrath City. I'm Mark Dooku, a mage, the vice-captain of the advance party. After a round of self-introductions, everyone finally knew. At this time, Shotrath City was being attacked again. The one leading the army was actually Kilrog Deadeye, who had just defected from the Horde and ran over to Illidan's camp. Shotrath City had never really been restored, even with the addition of some blood elves, who were the current astrologers. Shotrath City was still in a precarious situation. Willan, that quack, claimed to have seen the future. He had a premonition that there would be an Alliance team heading towards Shotrath City from here to seek contact. So, even though he was in a state of shortage of troops, he still sent a team of 20 people to provide support. However, not every Dreenii who received the protection of the Holy Light would be immortal. It was not easy for them to get out of the secret path. Before the group of 20 could even walk out of the Terakar forest, they were attacked by their former comrades, who were now the Broken, to the north of Turum, the former Dreenii settlement. Chapter 1390. The Broken were once a race of Dreenii who were influenced by the power of the Burning Legion. Many of them had lost their rationality and ego due to various circumstances, or changed their appearance and temperament. The current batch of breakers were the brainless ones. After sacrificing half of their companions, they were lucky enough to escape and entered the Thorn Trail. They were then surrounded by dozens of Steelfang marauders, and in the end, only Hoof Imriel was left. The original captain and vice-captain were all killed on the way. Duque scratched his head and thought, is this the lucky E of the ancient walk-on? But this was war. Although high-end martial arts could be used as the deciding factor, most of the time, it still depended on the efforts of mortals to tilt the scales of victory in their favor. Duque felt a little sorry for the Dreenii. After transmigrating for so long, Duque had seen many worlds. But now, Duque finally had a taste of what it felt like to continue to hold on to a world that was about to fall into the abyss of hell. He could not help but recall the rich elven forest. Even though it was once burned by the flames of war spread by the beast men, with the washing of time and the efforts of mortals, it was still able to recover. And not this land that was getting more barren by the day. Let's go. To Shotrath. Thomas said, but realized that Imriel did not move. It was obvious that this Drenii was acting out what it meant to be a rookie trembling. That was really trembling. The trembling was even more obvious on her tail. That was because every member of the Alliance team was riding on a large bug. These bugs looked very tame. But no matter how she looked at them, they were no different from the Steelfang marauders that almost took her life. Come on, it's okay. Thomas, who was riding on the bug, gently reached out his hand. Imriel looked left and right, and said weakly, Mr. Dooku, can I ride on the same mount as you? At this moment, Thomas's body suddenly stiffened, and the expression on his face froze. It was not hard to imagine that his single dog heart received 100,000 points of critical damage at this moment. The bystanders couldn't help but wonder if a gust of evil wind would blow in the next second and cause his entire body to be eroded and dissipate with the wind. Duke's face was full of embarrassment. In Karazhan, Jaina slammed the table and laughed. Duke. I didn't expect you to be able to provoke the little girl even though you're controlling an avatar. Wahahaha. Is this the legendary fatal invisible flirting? What else could Duke do when the other party had already said so? Mark, who was controlled by Duke, smiled and said, It's my honor, madam. There's another advantage to sitting behind me. At least you don't have to be afraid of being pricked by the edges of the armor. If that was the case, then forget it. I've never ridden a mount before. Can I sit in the front? I'm afraid I'll fall off. Thomas received an additional 1,000,000 points of critical damage to his soul. Sure. While riding on it, Imriel noticed a detail. She noticed that there was a line of words engraved on the hard shell of the worm's neck, Mount Akina. This is, Duke's face turned red, but he immediately put on a serious face. There's no time to explain. Get on. Oh, no, get on quickly. Oh, okay. The newbie was pure. She realized that she had been delayed here for too long. Now that her capital was under siege, and her people were constantly being sacrificed, she was still dawdling here. She even needed Mark, an ally, to remind her. She really shouldn't have done that. At that moment, Imriel couldn't help but respect Duke. With someone leading the way, the rest of the matter was much simpler. They still needed to pass through those few areas. Under Imriel's lead, the Alliance's advance party could avoid many places where monsters gathered. While looking for a place to insert the magic net signal booster, they pushed forward. The advance party spent 5 days and finally passed through the thorny rocky grounds, bypassing Turum, and arrived at the southwest of Shotrath City. Shotrath City was the capital of the Drenii people of Draenor. Another meaning of its name was where the holy light is. After Kill, Jaden deceived Zul and provoked the orcs to start a war against the Drenii. A fierce battle broke out here. Although the Drenii held fast to the capital, Shotrath City still fell. The entire city was reduced to ruins until Shatar came here. Originally, this place had already begun to be rebuilt. Although the progress was incomparably slow, it was indeed being rebuilt. Unexpectedly, after Illidan returned to the Outland, in order to make the entire Outland his strongest backing, he began to purge all those who opposed him. At that moment, the sound of war drums outside could be heard even a few kilometers away, reaching the center of Shotrath City. Unlike the tense atmosphere of the battle outside, the center of Shotrath City was quiet. Shotrath City had a strange structure. In the center, there was an incomparably huge hemispherical hall. The buildings of the Drenii all had a similar style. This hall was a bit like the Temple of Karabaer, the Drenii's holy land. It was supported by huge gray-brown pillars. In between the gaps of the stone building, it was all dazzling purple and blue glass. The pointed leaf-shaped doors were stacked one after another. No matter when it looked like a beautiful work of art. In the center of the hall, there was a human figure made of countless golden leaf-like fragments floating in the air. That was the synonym for holy light, Naru. This kind of energy creature with a strong sense of self was the most resolute existence against the burning legion. In front of the surging energy of the Naru's seat, even the most bloodthirsty warrior would be at peace, and the most exhausted believer would be in awe. In front of the seat of Naru, anyone who glanced at it from afar would receive great comfort from the pillar of holy light. In front of the seat of Naru, Valen carefully recalled the clues he had recently sensed about the future, trying to discern the deep or shallow connections between them. Over the past few months, he had sensed more and more fragmented clues. The Drenii prophet crossed his legs under his body and put his hands on his old knees. When he meditated, the crystal seemed to respond to his power. It shone, pulsed, and danced around him in a chaotic but not orderly way. Countless illusions that could happen in the future were surging towards him. Once again, he sensed a variable full of hope coming from the east. At this moment, on the wide passage of Shotrath City, garrison officer Maralad was holding a huge crystal warhammer, fighting against those hateful beast men. These guys looked no different from 20 years ago. He was very tired. Even if the holy light gave him endless courage, it still could not completely offset the exhaustion of his body. At this moment, his hooves slipped, causing him to fall to his knees. Seeing an incomparably filthy broken axe about to chop his neck, he could even feel the aura of death emanating from the poorly made axe blade with a few notches. Suddenly, the tribe blew the horn to retreat. What happened? Chapter 1391. The Drenii were at an absolute disadvantage. Although they had the support of the Holy Light and could theoretically heal their wounds endlessly, the Holy Light was not omnipotent. The blood lost in the wound could not flow back into the body, and the lost strength could only be recovered through rest. Unless there was a high concentration of Holy Light, there was no way to defend against knives, axes, and clubs. In the face of an enemy 10 times their size, the advantage of the Holy Light had been worn out. If it were not for the magic support of the astrologer, Shotrath City would have been breached long ago. It could be foreseen that if the situation did not improve, it would be a repeat of 25 years ago, and the Drenii would once again lose in a war of attrition. The orcs used blood and lives to wear down Shotrath City. However, the loud sound of war drums, the clanging of weapons, the moans of the dying struggling on the ground, and the angry roars, all the sounds were stopped by the sound of the retreat horn. What happened? Every warrior on the battlefield had a confused expression. Last time, the one who saved Shotrath City from destruction was the blood elf who had now become an astrologer. Who was it this time? No one. In the desolate sky, there was nothing. Ordinary birds and beasts had long been scared away by the loud noise. In the distance, the fell orcs, who had learned their lesson, had sent back and forth patrolling wolf riders. There were no reinforcements in sight. What drove Illidan's lackeys to give up the victory that was within their grasp? There was only one answer. It was a blue flag that had been raised beside the Drenii's Holy Light war flag in Shotrath City. None of the Drenii had seen this war flag. Legend had it that the flag of the alliance from another world, which had reached a preliminary alliance with the Drenii, was also blue. But that flag had a lion on it, and this one was a tornado. Could it be that this flag scared the enemy away? That was impossible, right? The Drenii garrison officers almost forgot to breathe, and looked at this scene with an expression that they had never seen before. Not to mention them, even the Drenii maiden Iril who had just raised the flag was so shocked that her jaw almost dropped. Her teeth were chattering. It actually scared off those ferocious orcs. Thomas, who was standing at the side, was also extremely shocked. Of course, he recognized this flag, or rather, he had grown up listening to the legend of this flag. This Storm Duke flag was the symbol of an era, a living legend. One flag to repel an army of 10,000. No one had expected that the miracle that had happened in Kuel Salas's Silvermoon City, which had been sung about by countless bards in the taverns, would repeat itself. Duque was already a demigod. Of course, he wouldn't bother to boast about himself. Even if he did not do so, Thomas and the other spectators would naturally tell Imriel about the legend of the flag. In an instant, the little girl had turned into a fangirl. Even her gaze towards the Storm War flag had become filled with some kind of fanaticism. It wasn't her fault. In recent decades, the Draenei had been bullied by the orcs. As outsiders of Draenor, how could the orcs give them face? Long before the orcs, under the instigation of Zul, started a full-scale war against the Draenei, both sides already had a feud. All kinds of border conflicts and mutual harm had long been the foreshadowing of this great war. It was just that at that time, the orcs lived a scattered lifestyle with clans as units. The Draenei also tried their best to suppress themselves under Valen's persuasion. But so what? The orcs took pride in killing the Draenei. The brave Draenei, their fathers and brothers had their heads chopped off and made into specimens, which were hung on the war flags of various clans. Their wives and daughters were used as food to feed the bloodthirsty war wolves. And all of this came to an end with the unparalleled war that lasted for several years, as well as the fall of Shotrath city. Battle after battle, defeat after defeat. Defeat after defeat. This was the portrayal of the Draenei. Today, the evil orcs came again. With hope for the light, the Draenei once again tried to defend their holy city, but no one had really imagined the taste of success. They relied purely on courage to support themselves. That kind of desperate struggle, and the feat of easily scaring away the orcs, formed a stark contrast. The Draenei maiden, Eiril, had a strange emotion in her heart that she could not understand. She suddenly became extremely eager to see the owner of this flag. At this moment, in Karazhan, Aurelia, who happened to be strolling by Duque's place, saw this scene. Yo! Not bad. I didn't think that this big flag of Duke Marcus could be used to swindle people in the Outland. The eldest sister of the Windrunner family teased Duque. Duque laughed. If it was all those brainless fell orcs, there really wouldn't be any way. Just nice, the one leading the army is Kilrog Deadeye. If it was another orc leader who was not clear-headed, he would most likely only be frightened for a moment, and would never give the order to retreat. Kilrog was different. He had inherited the memories of his previous life, and also the fear of being an orc. That was from the beginning of the second battle at the Dark Portal. No matter how he struggled, he could not succeed. No matter how he tried to change himself, he was still tortured by Duque. He could not take down the Iron Furnace Fort, and was brutally abused in the final battle. Then, he turned around and followed the new boss, Zul, and was abused again. He even died next to the Dark Portal. More importantly, Kilrog was one of the rare beast men who possessed Esper abilities. His single red eye had the ability to see the future to a certain extent, even though it could only see small fragments of the future. But all along, he had relied on this ability to consolidate his power and kill in all directions. This time, without exception, he looked at the flag with his one eye, which was usually blind. As expected. He clearly felt a trace of Duque's divine power. Almost at the moment he looked over, Kilrog saw an illusory projection of Duque that was even larger than Shotrath city. In Duque's deep black eyes, there seemed to be a dazzling seven-colored flame burning in the depths of his eyes. Duque opened his mouth slightly, and the next moment, the voice of the soul that came out seemed to shake the entire Draenor world. Sargera's soul trembles under my feet. Archimonde's soul was nailed to death by me on Mount Hyjal. Kilrog, who do you think you are? I'll only say this once, scram, the buzzing in the soul world triggered countless strange and blurry scenes of light. Kilrog saw at this moment that Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras, died tragically under Duque's sword. He saw the insufferably arrogant Archimonde being blown to death on Mount Hyjal, and even his bones were still hanging on a withered tree. He saw the huge and boundless distorted void fortress being wantonly blown into pieces. It turned out that the new master that he thought was invincible actually had such a weak side. Chapter 1392. At this time, Kilrog was already drenched in cold sweat. You can't possibly come to our world. You can't possibly come here. This is not your domain. It was as if he was asking himself, but also as if he was emphasizing it. It was more like an unconscious form of self-hypnosis. In his dazed state, Kilrogg muttered these words over and over in a neurotic manner. What did I do wrong? No. I didn't do anything wrong. Sar was too weak. Orcs will never be slaves. Bah! What he's doing now is to turn the Horde into eternal slaves of the Alliance. This world is the territory of the orcs. It's the world of the Burning Legion. You're just a demigod from the outside world, you can't do anything. Kilrogg was a smart person full of ambition. He would obey the strong, but that was under the premise that the other party had shown his decisive strength. He firmly believed that Illidan under Jaden could better fight against the detestable alliance. So, after returning to a place he was familiar with, he brazenly chose to raise the flag of rebellion. The funny thing was that when he faced Duque again, the first thing he thought of was the terrifying days when he was dominated by Duke Marcus. Continue to charge. No. No way. That guy is crazy. He can even burn his own main city, so he wouldn't care about the main city of the Draenei. The main building of Shotrath City was originally nested in the basin, and it relied on a few huge suspended tunnels for people from the outer city to directly enter the main building. If they used kerosene around the basin and set it on fire, then all the orcs in the tunnels would be finished. Chaotic memories floated into Kilrogg's mind. The more he didn't want to think about it, the clearer his dusty memories became. The orcs had absolute military strength? Ha! That wasn't the first time. One fire burned the elven forest, and nearly 100,000 orcs were burned to the ground. So what if they attacked Stormwind City? Another fire burned another 100,000 of your elites. They had an overwhelming military strength, but every time, hundreds of thousands of orcs would be buried at the bottom of the sea, all to be fed to the fish. Every chief knew that changes had to be made, so they tacitly agreed to Orgrim taking power. But so what? He was weakened time and time again, and faced defeat time and time again. Finally, he reached the end of the road. When Kilrogg woke up from the mental shock, he took a deep breath and exhaled all the air in his cold lungs in one go. His vocal cords, which were nourished by shadow power, let out a tremor of fear that came from the deepest part of his soul. All troops, heed my command. Retreat. Although the evil beast men were bloodthirsty and ferocious, they weren't like the legendary berserkers who completely lost their reason and couldn't distinguish between friend and foe. The signal to retreat rang out. No matter how unwilling they were, they still had to retreat. The Draenei guards and soldiers could finally breathe a sigh of relief. They lined up the guards, and then the main force slowly retreated back into the city. A large number of civilians began to pour out. Most of them served as logistics. They carried away every compatriot who was still breathing and used holy light to treat them as much as possible. They also cleaned up every evil beast man who was still breathing. This was not something that Duque and Thomas could handle. On the other side, Imriel, who was still in a state of shock, suddenly quivered. Duque noticed the faint holy light that shone beside her ear. There's such a thing. As expected, Imriel bowed to Duque and the others. Lord Valen is aware of your arrival and is now ready to receive you. Please follow me. All right. Duque and the others were near the outer city. Originally, the fastest way to get there was through the main passage that connected the inner and outer city. Because of the war, the 50-meter-wide passageway was already filled with all kinds of war machines or temporary bunkers. To enter the inner city, it was faster to walk through the basin. Walking through the messy basin, the surroundings had become a huge military camp, or rather, a temporary shelter. There were injured Draenei soldiers and skinny civilians everywhere. It was obvious that the city had begun to implement rationing, and all resources were prioritized for the guards and soldiers who could fight. Imriel was obviously a celebrity here. Almost every Draenei knew her and greeted her. Of course, not everyone and everything was good. Hey! Imriel! When are you going to pay me back the 6 copper coins you owe me? a Drenii lady said in Drenii language. Duque could clearly see that Imriel, who had been walking briskly after defeating the orcs, was instantly petrified. Duque was speechless. Was this the so-called dark history? Or a hero stumped by a single coin? Who would have thought that the famous Imriel in history would have such an embarrassing moment? When Hoof heard this, her hair stood up on the spot. Her blue tail stood up like a cat's fur. She glanced at Duque guiltily. Seeing that Duque did not seem to be paying attention to her, she patted her chest and hurriedly replied, Mamie. I've brought these guests to Lord Valen's place. That means I've completed my mission. I'll pay you back as soon as I get the reward. Just as she sent the sisters away, the naughty Duque, who was controlling Mark Dooku, said, Miss Imriel, what's 6 copper coins? Do you need me to back you up? On the other side, the Missy shouted again, Imriel. Hoof immediately switched to playing dumb. What? I can't hear you. What did you say? On the other side, she grabbed Duque's hand and said, Lord Valen is still waiting for you. Quick. Hero. Before she catches up to us, let's go. Pfft. If it were not for the fact that it was not the right time, Duque would have rolled on the ground a few times, slapped the table and laughed out loud. Was this still the serious Drenii archbishop from his previous life? After entering the heavily guarded passage, Duque and the rest arrived at the huge hemispherical main hall. The curved walls were engraved with mysterious runes that glowed with light. A Naru, who was glowing with a holy light and formed from a number of diamond-shaped blocks, was floating in the middle of the hall. Another older Drenii stood in front of the Naru. In every corner of the hall, the beautiful armor of the Drenii guards was polished until it shone brightly. Under the Naru's holy light, it looked even more holy. That older Drenii should be Valen. Standing around him were a few holy knights and guards, who bowed subtly to show their obedience to him. This obedience stems from a top-down power pyramid that is completely devoid of self-interest. Perhaps, only a race like the Drenii, who were completely idealistic, would have such a thing. Duque respected the religious beliefs of others, even if he himself was at the top of the hierarchy. The problem was, he, who had received the education of the great celestial empire, was a complete materialist. Chapter 1393. In the world of Azeroth, Duque had seen many gods. There were false gods, true gods, and evil gods. The biggest feeling that these gods gave Duke wasn't that they didn't have their own ideals, but that they were more humanized. Hacker was brainless and xenophobic. Thun was immoral and devoured everything. Elun was willing to take care of all good creatures under the stars. None of these gods were as pure as the Naru, and none of the believers were as completely selfless as the Drenii. Now that Duque had stepped into the realm of the gods, he should be prepared to have some fanatics who worshipped him. After all, he might be like Elun in the future, needing priests to spread his faith. Perhaps the power of faith mentioned in many novels before he transmigrated would be a necessity. Although Duque understood the purpose of these people's existence, he was afraid of dealing with fanatics. Yes, I'm just Mark Dooku, a little mage in charge of delivering letters and guarding the front lines. As soon as he thought of this, Duque immediately activated secret observation mode. At this time, a few huge figures stood in front of the team. The leader was a burly Drenii in heavy armor, the shield of Valen, the personal guard of the prophet. For safety's sake, I can only let 2 of you see the prophet. Thomas was keenly aware that he, the so-called messenger, was not the target of the other party's attention. It was obvious that the scene of Duque planting the flag had stunned the Drenii. In fact, it was not just Thomas who felt this way. Even Imriel noticed that many eyes were focused on Duque. Imriel flashed a silly smile. I will wait outside. After the prophet Valen summons you, if you still need me, I will be at your service. Thank you, Imriel. Thomas and Duque both revealed friendly smiles. Under the guidance of the shield of Valen, Thomas and Duque slowly walked over. As they walked, Thomas used small movements to tidy up his armor that he had already tidied up a few times. Duque heard Thomas muttering softly, "I am now representing the Alliance." The two walked closer. Willan wasn't originally a part of Shotrath City. Valen used to live in the Shrine of Karabaer. Duque could still remember the first time he saw the Shrine of Karabaer in the game before he transmigrated. Above the shimmering sky, bright stars surrounded the bright moon, shrouding the vast land in eternal twilight. The Shrine of Karabaer was located between the vast sea and the dark plains of the Moon Shadow Valley. Unfortunately, the Karabaer temple had already fallen during the war between the Drenii and the orcs. In the original history, Zul, who was still the great chieftain, had once opened a crack to another world in the temple of Karabaer, which resulted in the explosion of Draenor. In this life, Zul directly knelt in Karazhan. According to the information that Kale that's had previously sent back, after the orcs lost Zul, the temple was occupied by the Lord of the Abyss, Magtheridon. Then, when Illidan was beaten up by Arthes in Northrend, he returned to the Outland and colluded with Magtheridon. The temple of Karabaer became Illidan's lair. By the way, when it was occupied by the orcs, the temple of Karabaer was renamed the Temple of Darkness. Valen, who was homeless, could only temporarily hide in Shotrath City. Duque began to look at Valen, the super swindler. To be honest, no matter how many times he saw the Drenii, especially the male Drenii, Duque could easily associate them with demons. After all, they were of the same origin. The Drenii only called themselves Drenii after they split from Eridar. It was hard to imagine that the same race could give birth to the Drenii, a race of extreme light, and also evolve into the incomparably evil race of Eridar. Valen was very old. Even as a Drenii with an almost eternal lifespan, he still looked very old. Compared to the light blue skin of the Hoof Imriel, Valen's skin was more of a deep bluish purple. Because of his extremely long white eyebrows, coupled with the long beard that reached his navel, and the long blue beard on his chin that looked like 4 cow tails, for a moment, Duque thought that he was looking at a lobster man or something. The antennae, the beard, and the like were too powerful. Valen's white robe had complicated red embroidery with golden edges. Coupled with the noble and elegant purple as embellishments, and the huge back that looked like 4 torches that were taller than his head, he looked even more like a swindler. Towards these fancy things, Duque did not feel anything. However, when Duque and Valen looked at each other, he was suddenly shocked. At first, Valen's gaze was extremely calm, even to the point that his gaze felt like sunlight. For countless years, months, and days, it warmly shone upon every living being. His deep gaze was filled with wisdom, and it gave off a trance that could easily see through all falsehoods. However, in the next moment, the eternal calmness on Valen's face was swept away, replaced by a fleeting shock and anger. Compared to the calmness a moment ago, it was even more frightening. Even though Valen had only said one word, it was enough to raise the vigilance of Valen's shield and the guards. In less than 1/10 of a breath's time, they had already unsheathed the weapons at their waist. Numerous Valen's shield had already raised their large shields, blocking in front of Valen. Everything happened too quickly, and Thomas was caught unprepared. No one expected that in the next moment, Valen and Mark, who was controlled by Duque, would raise their right hands at the same time to stop them. "It's fine." The one who spoke was Valen. "Have we been seen through?" The one who smiled bitterly was Duque. Valen immediately made a gesture, and all the guards scattered. He turned his head and bowed slightly to Duque. "Please forgive these children. In the long years that have passed, Jaden has never given up on killing the Drenii. The one he hates more is me. That is why there has never been a lack of assassinations around me." "I understand." Duque replied calmly, "I have my difficulties as well. Can you keep what you saw a secret from me?" "Of course." After receiving Valen's reply, Duque turned around and faced the dumbfounded Thomas. "My apologies, Brother Thomas. Actually, I am the envoy for this visit to Shotrath City. I have no choice. I have received a secret order from the highest level of the Alliance. This is a secret order from the commander of the Alliance, Lord Duke Marcus. Please check it." Duque handed a very formal document to Thomas. The document was, of course, real. It was just something that Duque had casually made up last night while controlling Mark to take a dump. Thomas, you have already completed your duties very well. Go and rest first. Let me discuss this with Lord Valen. After sending off Thomas, who had a strange expression on his face, Duque faced Valen alone. All right, let's get straight to the point. Chapter 1394. Duque was not at all surprised that Willan could see through him. Willan was originally an Eridar. This mysterious race not only had high intelligence, but they also had talents that other races could only look up to in terms of the soul and the use of various energies. Duque could trick passers-by and trick hooves, but he definitely could not trick Willan. Willan had probably already seen through the fact that this Mark Dooku in front of him did not have a soul. Thinking of the elemental line that connected from outside Shotrath City to the forehead of this person in front of him, it would be strange if Willan did not know that this Mark Dooku was a puppet. Duque guessed that Willan had also used some special backtracking methods to find out that he was a demigod or something. It was very magical. Even after Willan had done so much, Duque still did not feel touched in Karazhan's defense system or his own spiritual senses. This method was also amazing. As expected, he could not underestimate the heroes of the world. At this time, Willan spoke. The 4 lobster-like tentacles on his chin made Duque's balls ache. Was this 4 blue balls glued to his chin? I did not see through everything, but I deduced that it was you. All right, honorable guest, how should I address you? Just call me Mark Dooku. But the agreement I reached with you will be sent over in the form of an official document from Fort Glory within 3 days. Duque was still very careful. He did not doubt the loyalty of Willan's subordinates, but the Burning Legion's methods of gathering intelligence had nothing to do with loyalty. Any detail could be analyzed, and a lot of things could be calculated. Mark Dooku was not a suitable chess piece to be exposed at this time. If there was no direct video and first-hand information, then Duque, who could not leave Azeroth, could only command blindly if he really wanted to. When Willan heard Duque's words, there was an obvious sense of relief on his face. The situation of the Draenei was too bad. It should be said that they had not been well for the past 30 years. Recently, with Illidan becoming the king of the Outland, the situation of the Draenei had worsened. It wasn't that Willan hadn't come into contact with the Alliance from the alien planet called Azeroth. In his eyes, the Draenei were the natural allies of the Draenei, who had fought against the Old Horde and fought against the Burning Legion. He was also confident that he could convince any of the higher-ups of the Alliance. The problem was, if he couldn't even meet them, he would be in despair. Kale, that's took good care of the Draenei, but Kale, that sent a division to Shotrath City and ran to the Draenei's spaceship. The Draenei's retreat was important, but Shotrath City was also crucial. The most troublesome thing was that Valen learned from the astrologer who had defected to them that the seemingly powerful Prince Kale didn't have much say in the powerful alliance. The alliance was a union formed by a bunch of countries of different races. The foundation of the alliance was the kingdoms, so each king or leader would have a certain degree of say. The race with the largest number of kingdoms was the humans, who were the core race of the alliance. And above all the kings was the commander who was jointly elected by the kings of the various countries. That was the human mage Duke Marcus from Stormwind. Valen was very happy that the alliance was made up of the Church of Holy Light, who also believed in the Holy Light. But there was another problem. Only a king called Kalia Menethil believed in the Holy Light, and Kalia was almost a mascot in Kale, that's words. Most of the power of the alliance was in the hands of the mages and warrior leaders. What else could Valen do? It was very difficult for him too. Due to the inconvenience of transportation and communication difficulties, he barely knew that the Alliance and the so-called New Horde had begun an expedition to Draenor through the astrologer's intermittent magic transmission. He also heard that it was the king of Stormwind City who had come. Valen was both happy and nervous. For the arrival of the Alliance, Valen could be said to have painstakingly prepared a lot of materials. Originally, Valen was already very happy to be able to get on William's good side. Who knew that after using his soul to backtrack, he would find out that the master of the puppet in front of him was actually the only demigod in the alliance. Valen was so excited that his hands were almost trembling. Although due to the situation, I was unable to reach a face-to-face exchange, I am still very grateful to the Alliance's commander, His Excellency Duke Marcus, for taking this seriously. I am the one who is embarrassed that I can't come personally. Then, before we officially talk, I hope to show you something, His Excellency, the older Drenii said softly. He stretched his body and floated up. The prophet maintained a height of about 10 centimeters above the complicated and gorgeous patterns on the ground of Shatrath city. He approached Mark and tried to press his palm between Mark's eyebrows. I am very sorry for this action. To achieve telepathy, this is necessary, the prophet said. Duque was curious. Is it about Argus? Or is it about the period when you were one of the 3 heads of Eridar? Ah. Valen was struck by lightning. He was struck by lightning. One had to know that at this point in time, the Drenii's contact with the Alliance was simply too one-sided. Many of the big shots in the Alliance had not even seen a living Drenii. They had only seen the fragments of the magic mirror from Kale, that's. In addition, there were not many people from Eridar in the Burning Legion. Even Archimonde, his appearance had changed a lot under the dark energy change. Most of the Alliance had no way to connect the Burning Legion demons with a pair of bat wings with the Drenii. And the ones they were fighting on the front lines were still their old enemies, the Fell Orcs. Who would have thought that Duke would reveal Valen's background right from the start? That was not all. There was more to come. Don't be surprised. I once went back 10,000 years ago through the Bronze Dragon King Nazdormu, who controls time in Azeroth. There was a small mistake that time, and I mixed into the Burning Legion. I faced Kill, Jaden's main body. I also know the grudge between Kill, Jaden and you and your people. So, in the matter of fighting against the Burning Legion, our interests are absolutely the same. If there are no major problems, I will represent the Alliance to invite the Drenii to join. Wait. Wait. Happiness came too suddenly, and Valen simply did not know what to do. For the past 25,000 years, the Drenii had been hunted down and defeated again and again. It was fine if they were not a match for the Burning Legion. When they came to Draenor, they continued to be beaten by the Orcs. After the Orcs were finished, Illidan continued to beat them. In the eyes of many of the Alliance's higher-ups, the Drenii were scum. Small population, weak combat power. In Kale, that's report, it only mentioned that helping the Drenii could gain an advantage in the war in Draenor. After all, the enemy of the enemy was an ally. He never mentioned inviting the Drenii to join. Well, Duque came up and said, bro, don't even think about it. The Alliance and you are destined to be brothers. It was as if Valen had prepared for today's exam for several years, memorized countless books, and imagined countless possibilities. In the end, Duque just said, no time to explain, get in the car. Chapter 1395. Valen was still in a daze. He could not believe his ears. Didn't the Drenii need the Alliance? Of course they needed it. The intermittent encirclement of the beast men and demons had already pushed the Drenii to the brink of collapse. Now, the remaining Drenii were not even 1% of the original number. It seemed like the price of recovering Shatrath City was the loss of almost all the young adults. Look, once they walked out of this hemispherical hall, they could see dying tribesmen everywhere in the residential area. They moaned weakly in the dirty and smelly muddy water, quietly waiting for the arrival of the Grim Reaper. Holy Light was not omnipotent. Holy Light could heal wounds and soothe the soul, but Holy Light could not solve malnutrition, could not let people regrow lost limbs, and could not kill the parasites that had burrowed into the body. Although Valen did not doubt that if those evil and dirty beastmen invaded the residential area, his dying brethren would teach the invaders what willpower was and what a desperate counterattack was, this could not stop this from being the best manifestation of the cruel reality of dying struggle. 25,000 years of fleeing did not shatter Willen's incomparably tenacious heart. If he were to fall, there would be no one else who knew the Burning Legion's background like he did. He could not fall, even if his tribesmen were all dead, even if he was the only one left. At this time, he learned about the Alliance, and that there was a world in this world that the Burning Legion could not even touch. Even the astrologer of Shotrath City showed him a short video of the Burning Legion's invasion, including Archimonde's corpse hanging on the World Tree's severed limb on Mount Hyjal. Back then, in order to boost morale, the Alliance played this video on repeat in the main cities of the Alliance for 3 months. Of course, Valen recognized that this was his old friend, Archimonde, who was at loggerheads with him back then. From that day onwards, Valen was mentally prepared to hug his thigh. Again, happiness came too suddenly, and he really didn't dare to believe it. After a short silence, there was a flash of joy. Valen bowed deeply. On behalf of 300,000 Drenii, I thank the Alliance for their generosity and acceptance. This is the honor of the Drenii. 300,000 was definitely a rough estimate. The Drenii had been killed off a long time ago, and were chased everywhere by the beastmen like ducks. Duque truly wondered if there were still 100,000 sane Drenii. Of course, Duque did not doubt that Willan had a special way to communicate with his people. For example, the twin emperors. F*CK, that kind of precise number, which was accurate down to the single digit, had almost scared Duque out of his wits when he had first reported it. Of course, Duque would not deny this number. For a human population of tens of millions, even if all the Drenii went to Azeroth, they wouldn't even cause a ripple. That's easy. All countries in the Alliance are equal, and the Drenii are no exception. Let the subordinates discuss the specific details. Now that the connection to the magic network is good, you can tell us if you have any requests. The Alliance will try our best to satisfy you. Food. Valen blurted out. As if he was afraid that Duque did not understand the severity of the problem, Valen emphasized, a large amount of food. The war destroyed all production. We've lost all our fields, so we can only send a small number of our compatriots through the secret tunnel every day to gather food in the forests outside the orcs' control. Food, right? How much do you want? The first batch, I hope to have 100 tons, and the sooner the better. As you wish. At this moment, Dumuk's level shot up from 0 to 100. He did not even need to blink. Dumuk, magic lamp possession. He heard Duque snap his fingers, and the next moment, a few-dimensional bags suddenly opened beside Duque. Clang clang clang, the sound of hard objects falling to the ground was continuous. Rectangular strips about 20 centimeters long, shining with golden light, fell out of the void. In just a few blinks of an eye, they had already piled up into a small mountain in front of Valen. Duque smiled. Please call Hoof. Imriel here. Valen nodded almost imperceptibly. Naturally, there were servants who called in Hoof, who was wandering outside the hall, staring at Thomas while simultaneously activating secret observation mode. Hoof was curious. She looked calm on the surface, but her cheerful footsteps and large swishing of her tail betrayed her mood. What calmness! It was obvious that he had eagerly rushed over. Teacher Valen, you called for me. Imriel was a little excited, but also a little nervous. Valen looked at his young disciple with a loving gaze. Ambassador Dooku is looking for you. Hoof turned her head and blinked her eyes. Is there anything I can help you with? Duque smiled without saying a word. He snapped his fingers again, and a 50 centimeters long, 25 centimeters wide, and 20 centimeters tall thing that looked a little like an ice basin formed in front of the Drenii. At the same time, he also communicated with the water elemental plane and poured a basin of water into it. Although the taste will not be too good, it is indeed made from high-quality food. After saying that, Duque casually picked up a piece of gold and tore off the surface wrapping, revealing a solid brown piece. Duque casually threw it into the pool. At first, it was nothing, but soon the small brick at the bottom of the pool began to react with the water, and bubbles kept coming out. Plop plop. The strange sound attracted the attention of the surrounding Drenii. In less than 30 seconds, the small piece of brick greedily absorbed the water at a speed visible to the naked eye, and became a big soft cake that almost burst the ice basin. Duque made a gesture of invitation. A Valen shield stepped forward, broke off a small piece, and put it in his mouth. Soon, a smile appeared on his rough face. I tasted wheat, eggs, and a few plant seasonings. It is quite nutritious. Almost as soon as he finished speaking, Imriel's tail spun like a windmill. Let me try it too. With light steps, Imriel also broke off a piece. It tastes good. Why did you say it did not taste good? At this moment, in Karazhan, Duque slapped his forehead, his face full of bitter smiles. Aurelia, who was beside him, touched his nose and smiled faintly. Whether it tasted good or bad was relative. As a transmigrator, Duque's understanding of modern warfare definitely surpassed that of the world of Azeroth. He had long proposed the concept of compressed biscuits. Before Duque transmigrated, the humans and dwarves of the Azeroth all ate bread as their staple food. But during the 2 large-scale battles across the sea, bread was too troublesome and took up too much space. So, Duque insisted on adding things like compressed biscuits and canned fish to the logistics. To be honest, these were all warehouse goods from a few years ago, but the Draenei treated them like treasures. Chapter 1396. As a fan of the puppet army before his transmigration, and a commander who had personally led troops through many battles, Duque was well aware of how tough it was for the soldiers. Think about it. After a whole day of battle, the soldiers would be lying in the trenches or in the camp on the bloody battlefield. They would even have to soak their feet in the mud when the weather was bad. However, after a bloody battle, they would often be given a piece of black bread that was not much bigger than a palm. When this black thing did not get wet, it could be used as a brick to hit people. Although it was a staple food for the poor in this era, it was only the lowest form of protection for soldiers who desperately needed to recover their strength. It was better than nothing. Hence, after the Dark Portal defeated Arthas' Calamity army on the Lordaeron continent in 15 years, Duque took control of the Alliance and proposed to make the first batch of compressed biscuits. Duque thought of a way to get the dwarves to mix the flour, and then compress it into a small piece. Alright, it had to be said that the dwarves were very capable. He still remembered the first time he saw the finished product. Duque ran over to take a bite, and almost broke his teeth on the spot. He finally managed to cut a small piece, and smashed it with a hammer, only to vomit on the spot. What the hell is this black thing? Magni shrugged. Probably engine oil. Lang looked down on Duque's lack of knowledge. Don't worry, a little engine oil won't kill anyone. When those bastards down there don't have any alcohol to drink, they still steal engine oil and mix it with water to drink. Duque rolled his eyes. These bastards thought that they had a long HP and high HP, so they were courting death. However, what the 2 dwarves said was the truth. During the second battle at the Dark Portal, when the Iron Stove Castle was facing a food crisis, there were still many fellows who shouted that they could go without food, but not without alcohol. Only later did they find out that the compressed biscuits were indeed compressed enough. The damn dwarves actually used a press to press the compressed biscuits, and didn't even wipe off the oil stains. Duque spent a full 3 weeks to make this bunch of violent dwarves understand that the compressed biscuits could be given to the frontline soldiers. It must be able to bite through, and there must be no impurities. It must also be waterproof and moisture-proof. Of course, this was a thing of the past. Now, the Alliance's standard military rations had been improved to the 5th version. Compressed biscuits, sealed packaged flour, canned soybeans, canned pickled dace, canned beef jerky. Most importantly, the Alliance had developed canned soup that could automatically heat up with a pull of a rope, as well as instant noodles that had poisoned countless youths before Duque's transmigration. With the addition of all kinds of new military stoves, they could eat freshly baked white bread when conditions permitted. If there were no other conditions, he could use clean water that had been filtered through a strainer to boil it. Hot soup and instant noodles would definitely not be a problem. In order to facilitate transportation, the Alliance had made many things standardized, such as boxes for storing artillery shells and canned military rations. Furthermore, the types of weapons were reduced, such as the size of the cannonballs and melee weapons. Only in terms of food, there were more and more varieties. The beef jerky alone had 5 different flavors. No matter how conservative the commanders were, they had to admit that the morale of the soldiers was much higher than before. In the past, after a big battle, the soldiers were all like dead dogs, but now they were full of energy the next day. Back then, after the battle, we only had black bread. Instead of being hacked to death by the enemy on the battlefield, we almost choked to death on our own rations. The Alliance officers who were now lieutenants and colonels complained about this the most to the soldiers. Undeniably, because of these little things that the nobles and officers couldn't see, the Alliance's support for Duque had always been full. The Drenii temporarily wouldn't be able to experience this benefit. Of course, to prevent the Drenii from grumbling in their hearts when they found out the truth, Duque decided to give them a heads up first. To be honest, these foods were eliminated by the Alliance. Because of the high compression ratio, they are the most convenient to carry in spatial storage bags. Considering that you Drenii urgently need food, we used this method, Duque said apologetically. Valen used the holy light to examine it once, and a bright smile appeared on his face. No. Being able to fill our stomachs and survive is already the greatest gift to the Drenii. I thank Commander Duke Marcus on behalf of my people. For a moment, Duque thought he was hearing things. It sounded like the voice of someone with a high favorability rating. He took the time to glance at the system. Wasn't it close? He found that his reputation rating in Shotrath City had jumped from indifferent to reverent. Needless to say, this time, he almost moved himself. To use the food that the Alliance had accumulated for 6 to 7 years and was about to expire to give a favor, and then gain a huge boost in reputation, this was a good deal. Imriel, please distribute this food to your people. Duque turned and said to the hoof. Who knew that when he turned around, Duque almost burst out laughing. Although the hoof was full of energy, it was actually starving, or it could be said that the food in Shotrath City was too bad, causing it to be gluttonous. What happened to the food test? What the hell, eating until both sides of your cheeks are full, what the hell is this? After noticing Duque's gaze, the hoof was so scared that it choked. It grabbed its neck with both hands, looking like a ghost that was about to hang itself. Woo, help, Duque was speechless. He also did not know how he understood. Anyway, he first passed a pot of water to Imriel and let her gulp it down, then helped her to pat her back a few times. Only then did she gulp down the food. Hoo, I almost thought I was going to choke to death. The hoof kept patting her chest. Duque noticed that she was choking on her tears. Valen, who was at the side, held his forehead. He was speechless, as if saying, why did I teach such a disciple? Excuse me. Valen could only smile bitterly. Duque thought of something. No, it's okay. Imriel's behavior reminded me. A person who has been starving for too long, suddenly overeating, will cause sudden death. So even if the food is distributed, please slowly increase it. Valen was slightly stunned, and the gratitude in his heart increased. A person who can think of such details is indeed a person whose heart is filled with holy light. Duque was speechless. Alright, a few words can bring up the topic of holy light again. I, who was seriously discussing scientific knowledge with a fraud, feels so helpless. On the other side, Duque and Valen were discussing the next step of cooperation. On the other side, Imriel, surrounded by the guards, had already begun to distribute food. We have already joined the Alliance from the world of Azeroth. This alliance has defeated the Horde more than once. They even killed the first chief of the Horde, Black Hand. The alliance has just sent people to deliver food. Everyone has it, no need to squeeze. On this day, countless Drenii were in tears. Chapter 1397. Who was the one crying tears of joy? Who was the one cheering for the seemingly ordinary food? There was only one answer, the Dreenii. The Dreenii were too bitter. They had been chased by their former compatriots for over 20,000 years, wandering everywhere with nowhere to hide. Almost every planet they went to, there would be burning legions void battleships chasing after them. Forget about 1,000 years of peace, it was already good enough to have 50 years. Many times, the civilizations and races they encountered were weaker than them. They could not help them resist the burning legion. In order not to screw them over, they would even take the initiative to leave those planets with intelligent beings. How could they be like today, receiving shelter and protection from a powerful force? From the astrologers who had already become a branch of Shotrath City, they had heard of the powerful legends of the Alliance. Now, it seemed like they were lucky enough to be witnesses to this invincible legend. Be careful not to choke. If you've been hungry for too long, your stomach won't be able to take it if you suddenly eat too much. She had a serious expression on her face, as if the person who had just choked on the food was not her, but some passerby. Fortunately, the Dreenii all believed in the holy light. Even the apprentices from Karabeir's temple had a sense of blind obedience. Both adults and children were hungry, but they were very disciplined. There was no crowding, no fighting, and everyone lined up to wait for Imriel and the others to distribute the food. Do you see that? There are many tons of food there, enough for us to eat for a month. Hold on for another week or two, and the Alliance will open up a path from Hellfire Peninsula to Shotrath City. The Dreenii listened to Duke's little suggestion, and took the mountain of compressed biscuits and soft food that looked like puffed cakes and patrolled one round around Shotrath City. With food in their hands, they did not panic. The Dreenii were famous for their resilience. Now, they were even more confident that they could defend their main city. At the entrance of the main hall, the shield of Valen surrounded Valen and Duke, standing side by side. Valen looked at this scene and felt a lot of emotions. I really didn't expect this. There are many things that you didn't expect. The Dreenii joining the Alliance is a win-win for all of Azeroth and the Dreenii. The Alliance needs your technology and the guidance of the Holy Light. You need the Alliance's combat power and protection. We are natural allies, aren't we? Indeed. Valen nodded. Nothing could be more beautiful than this union. One had to know that within the Alliance, the Church of Holy Light was a pillar that transcended nations and races. Even though the Night Elves had the protection of Elune, the Holy Light Church was still the main force in the Alliance. Coincidentally, ever since Alonso's and Uther died, the position of Archbishop of Holy Light had been vacant. Duque immediately suggested that the great trickster Willan should take this position. They were of different races, but their beliefs were the same. In addition, educating outsiders was a great honor for the Dreenii. How could Valen refuse? His heart that was hanging in the air had long since been put down. As long as the Alliance sent reinforcements, they would be able to announce that Delaney had perfectly merged into the Alliance. Praise the Holy Light. Praise the Alliance. Long live the Prophet. Now that he was full, if he didn't roar, how could he be worthy of this ecstasy and joy? The entire Shotrath city was boiling. The noise spread thousands of meters away, and the entire Fel Orc camp could hear the unique cheers of the Dreenii. Kilrog Deadeye knew that Shotrath city wouldn't be able to be conquered by just relying on him and his Fel Orc army. He was also suffering. When he first joined Illidan, the first order that Illidan gave him was a death order. But in the past few days, he couldn't contact Illidan at all. His new master seemed to have disappeared from the face of the earth. The command center of the entire Outland army was completely paralyzed, and the commanders of each place were fighting their own battles. Magtheridon asked for help from the Dark Temple, but the Dark Temple ignored him. He asked for help from Vasht's Naga army in Zangarmarsh to the west, but Vasht said that without Illidan's orders, she could only continue to carry out her original orders and extract the lake water from the swamp. As the saying goes, every family has its own problems. At this time, the tribe was also in trouble. In the frontline camp outside Hellfire Citadel, Thrall looked up at the sky. The Azeroth sky and earth seemed to be a distant memory, far away in his mind. All he could see was the endless darkness in the sky, torn apart by the occasional flash of light or mysterious energy. Seeing the stalwart figure beside him, Thrall asked, "What's the situation?" "There are a lot of casualties, but more importantly, our food supply can't keep up." The dead man had no expression to speak of, but Orgrim's voice was full of shame. "It's all my fault. I should have known that the situation would be worse than I thought." He thought that when he returned to his hometown, the tribe with the orcs as the core would be fighting on home ground. He didn't expect that his hometown was still his hometown, but it had long changed beyond recognition. Even with the addition of the goblins, the tribe's supply method was still primitive. It was the kind of gathering local materials and then consuming the surrounding natural resources like locusts. 23 years ago, in the era when Orgrim left, it was still possible to hunt near the dark portal, despite the lack of resources. Now, the land was completely barren, and even if there were monsters wandering around, most of them were demonized creatures that had been seriously contaminated by dark energy. There really weren't many prey that could be eaten. It wasn't that demonized creatures couldn't be eaten, but the problem was that eating them would make them more and more like fell orcs, and that was completely putting the cart before the horse. Originally, Thrall had also asked Kilrog and the other orcs who came from the dark portal later, but he didn't expect them to have ulterior motives. They actually lied and said that they were not much different from Orgrim's time. If the tribe could learn from the Alliance and use elite tactics, they might be able to reduce the pressure by reducing the number of soldiers. The point was that they couldn't. Ask the Alliance for help. I'm willing to bet that Duque calculated that we would have a problem with supplies, so he must have reserved our share. Orgrim gritted his teeth. This wasn't hatred, it was more like helplessness. None of the tribe leaders could blame Duque, because before they passed through the dark portal, Duque had specially asked William to ask if they wanted to prepare supplies for the tribe. Of course, supplies were not free, and the tribe needed to exchange more ore and resources. There's no other way. That's the only way. Thrall sighed. He had long noticed that the tribe was being invaded by the Alliance's economy and culture. Ever since the ceasefire and forming an alliance with the Alliance, he had been paying attention to boosting the tribe's race soul and reducing the invasion of the Alliance's various values and social views. Now it seemed that he had failed. Half a day later, the canned beef from the Alliance arrived from Fort Glory. There was a burst of enthusiastic cheers in the tribe's camp. This made Thrall feel even more defeated. Chapter 1398. Everyone was a natural foodie. The life of eating raw meat and drinking blood sounded heroic, but one would only know how bitter it was after living it. Without oil, salt, soy sauce, and vinegar, the prey they hunted would at most be roasted and eaten. How could this compare to the cumin-infused barbecue of the Alliance? Recently, when the tribe faced a disaster, it was the Alliance that provided them with food. In order to reduce wastage when crossing the ocean, canned food was of course the priority. In the tribal camp, Sal saw with his own eyes how a newly matured tribal warrior chose his favorite flavor and then skillfully opened the can. Look, Orgrim. Now, even those kids know how to use canning knives to open Alliance cans. Sal sighed. Orgrim was silent for a moment. Even though he was already a dead man, he still felt a heavy sense of duty on his shoulders. The Horde cannot defeat the Alliance, not even with all the orcs in our world. If you fall behind, you will be beaten. Thrall squeezed the words out of his mouth. The Alliance is not using force now, but they are gradually doing what Tyreenas wanted to do in the past, turn orcs into slaves. In other words, he wanted to assimilate the orcs, trolls, and Tauren races into the Alliance. This unstoppable trend was the most terrifying. The Alliance was already ahead of the Horde in economic, military, and political fields. In addition, there was a huge difference in population and country size between the two sides, as well as the fact that the leader of the Alliance was a demigod who didn't age or die. Under normal circumstances, the tribe would have no chance at all. Unless, the two tribal elders instantly thought of the same thing. But as soon as their eyes met, they looked away. That's right. Unless the alliance changed and suffered a crushing defeat, it had to be something like Duque dying in battle and the alliance collapsing. But neither of them would forget the principle of being in the same boat. If the alliance lost like this, they would definitely have lost to the Burning Legion. Perhaps this was a chance for the Horde to rise up, but it was more likely that the Horde would be destroyed along with the alliance. As long as the tribe leader wasn't an idiot, he wouldn't purposely make this happen. Sigh. Do your best. It was November 2nd. On this day, good news finally came from the Allied army. William led half of the Alliance's hero team to kill the Lord of the Abyss, Magtheridon. 2 days later, the main force of the Horde conquered the entire Hellfire Citadel. At this point, the first goal of the Allied forces had been achieved. There were 2 general directions in front of the Allied forces. The first was to charge west into Zangermarsh. If they could open up the swamp, then the Allied army's choices would become more plentiful. They could turn north into Blade Peak and chase after those traitors who betrayed the tribe. Finally, they could go further north to the Nether Storm and settle all the unstable factors. They could also head south of the swamp and enter Nagrand, where most of the normal orcs lived. The second was to enter Terakar Forest from the southwest. He would completely establish a connection with the Draenei, and then use Shotrath City as a base and supply transfer point. However, the following march would not be easy. This was because the Auchinton area in the southern part of the Teroka forest was completely out of control. There were a large number of undead creatures, Illidan's lackeys, and the crowmen. Of course, they could directly attack Moon Shadow Valley from the east of Shotrath City, where Illidan's lair, the Black Temple, was located. But if he did that, he would run the risk of his retreat being cut off. Because Vashj could easily ambush the Allied army's supply line. No army could withstand this kind of attack from the front and back. However, the Allied army could not avoid it at all. From Fort Glory to Shotrath City, Duque and his party could be said to have a smooth journey. That was under the premise that the Nagas did not make a move. Because on the road from the Thorn Cliffs to Shotrath City, not far to the north was Lake Hermia. That lake was connected to Zangermarsh. Within 5 kilometers of the water, it was definitely the Nagas' world. In the Allied army meeting, the leaders of the Alliance and the Horde were all worried. Don't you have Nagas in the Alliance? How about letting them go into the swamp and fight with that Vashj? Orgrim would never forget how the elites of the Blackrock clan under his command were tortured to the point of crying for their parents 20 years ago. It was the same in Southshore, and it was the same in the hinterland's Seaview Cliff. Varian smiled bitterly and shook his head. I've already asked. I've also asked Duque to borrow that Naga. Did Duque refuse? Sal asked. No, the point is that Duque thinks that Vashj is likely to be a demigod. He doesn't have any good suggestions to give us. This time, the faces of the leaders did not look good. They were good at fighting on land, and barely passable in air battles. When it came to water battles, they could only be a group of salted fish shouting 666 at the side. Even with underwater breathing, magic, it was useless. Did they have to go into the water wearing metal cans? There was no need to fight, they would sink directly to the bottom of the water. Once the duration of the magic ended, they could only type GG amidst the laughter of the Nagas. Can we only find a breakthrough from Teroka? Orgrim muttered. Varian let out a breath of turbid air. Fandral. In the name of the commander of the Alliance Expeditionary Army, I order you to lead the Cenarian Expeditionary Army and build a forward base just past the Thornfang region. You will think of a way to deal with Vashj's Naga troops. At the very least, you must restrain her. Fandral Staghelm said bitterly. Ever since Du made a small report before Isra left, Fandrel's position in the Cenarian Assembly had become a little unstable. Tyrant had sent him to the Outland with a single order. Under the double pressure, he had no choice but to obey. Alright, it was not wrong to let the Druids deal with the underwater creatures. After all, only the Druids could transform into seals and have underwater combat power. Ignoring the constipated Fandral, the Alliance and the Horde began to discuss the defense of Teroka. The final result of the discussion was that the Alliance would defend Lake Hermia in the north of Turoka Forest, be responsible for transforming Shotrath City, and build a fortress at the entrance of the Moon Shadow Valley to prevent Illidan's counterattack. The Horde would focus on attacking the Auchinton area and opening up the road to Nagran so that more orcs could join the Alliance. This plan did not seem fair at all. The Alliance had to divide their forces, and the burden was also heavy. As the leader, one had to have the responsibility of leading. Now that the Alliance was stronger, this was the only way. In Karazhan, Duque finished reading the copy of the conference report sent by Varian, threw it aside, and rubbed his eyebrows. I didn't expect Vashj to become such a huge problem. On the surface, once the road to Nagrand was opened, it was possible to take 1,000,000 Horde troops and ignore Vashj and directly attack the Black Temple. But in reality, that was not the case. In the Outland, the teleportation portal was quite unstable. At most, Duque could open up a teleportation portal that was specifically connected to Shotrath City, but he could not guarantee a teleportation portal that continued to the front lines of the Moon Shadow Valley. Without a guarantee of supplies, he could not expect the frontline soldiers to have any combat power. I still have to deal with Vashj first. Chapter 1399. Duque never felt that Vashj was very strong. Even in the game before he transmigrated, the team led by Duque only took about 3 days to complete the first kill. In the reality of this life, Vashj became a big problem. If a Naga was more than 5 kilometers away from any large body of water, their strength would greatly decrease. Not only because they were aquatic creatures, but also because there was too little water in the air, which would directly affect the strength of the female Naga's magic. In water battles, Vashj, who was probably already a demigod, was almost unbeatable. As long as they stayed in deep enough water, in theory, only the deep-sea giants could fight the Naga. The deep-sea giants did have a boss called Morogrim Tidewalker, but the problem was that he was also in the Serpent Shrine. He was Vashj's underling. Above Vashj, only Queen Azhara and the ancient god Zoth were above her. Alright, they were all wearing the same pair of pants. The Naga's lower body was in the shape of a snake and did not wear pants. Sorry. If Duque could descend into the Serpent Shrine, Duque had at least a 90% chance of killing Vashj alone. Yet, he dared to come, and kill. Jaden dared to descend and block him. Duque did not have the guts to fight CEO Egg, whose strength was 100% or even full of rage, in a place without anti-Titan and anti-Burning Legion formations. That would be courting death. Perhaps in the original history, because of this reason, there were not many big shots in the Alliance who appeared in the Outland War. Yet, the geographical location of Zengermarsh was too important. One Vashj was like a sword of Damocles hanging on the neck of the Alliance army, ready to cut down at any time. Duque felt a headache coming on. Whatever, at most, I'll just have to pretend and let Fandral take the blame. The entire month was spent in the Alliance army's rest and strategic shift. On the 5th of November, at the easternmost side of Zengermarsh, Fandral personally went down to direct the arrangements and build the Cenarian camp. On the same day, Jaina was overseeing the blasted land, while Anastrian was at the Hellfire Peninsula. The two Breaking Dawns worked together to open the dark portal to the maximum, and finally transported the Alliance's most advanced road opener over. The so-called road opener was actually something similar to a road roller. But it was more violent and larger. Even if it had been dismantled and transported, it still brought a heavy burden to the portal. This was because the roller in front of the road roller was as tall as a 5-story building and as wide as 16 horse carriages. Think about it. A 5-story building was falling on you. What kind of earth-shattering feeling was that? The dwarves' current steel forging technology was not up to standard, and they could not make such a large roller. Black technology was never something that could be achieved in a single leap. If they couldn't form it in one piece, the dwarves could do it like building a ship. They could use rivets to fasten the bent steel plates together and weld them. As a result, a gigantic creature was born. Coupled with the Alliance's latest slap-you-in-the-face diesel engine, this kind of road opener would definitely be shocking to drive. Wasn't that so? Anyone who had been inhaled by the black smoke from the chimney would feel like they had rolled dozens of times in a coal yard. Only a dwarf would dare to use such an environmentally unsound and inefficient thing. In any case, since the day this thing was born, Duque had forbidden it from entering any of the main cities of the Alliance other than the steel furnace fort. What kind of joke was this? If they were sprayed by this thing, all humans and animals would die, and there would be no need to plant crops. But there was nothing Duque could do. The diesel was still the latest product, and the quality was terrible. The diesel engine was about the same, just one level higher than the steam engine. Alright, the Allied army could not go west. The entire Hellfire Peninsula was surrounded by air forces, and even if they flew over, they would be suspended in the void. With nothing to do, an army of 100,000 killed all the monsters southwest of Fort Honor in a week, and the steel-toothed marauders could only be found in the specimen room. After leaving Fort Honor, they went southwest, passed through the warp plains, and arrived at the Thorn Path. The road opener only took 3 days. The intersecting, steel-hard, scalp-numbing thicket of thorns gave off a continuous series of explosions under the pressure of the road opener. Weren't you very hard? Weren't you not afraid of fire? Come. Who's afraid of who in a head-on fight? After the unreasonable road roller rolled over, the diesel bulldozer went up, and the dwarven construction team followed to pave the road and bridge. In any case, after 3 days of rumbling, they finally opened up a wide road that was comparable to the Glorious Avenue. In the Thorn Cliff, Duque, Thomas, Imriel, and a dozen Drenii stood on the side of the road. Seeing the huge road opener completely flattening the thorn forest, which was once the Drenii's forbidden land, Imriel and the others were stunned. Is this the strength of the Alliance? Imriel's tail kept spinning, and the curiosity of a young girl was evident on her face. Ha! The Drenii's technology level is actually very high. It's just that you lack energy. To be honest, Duque had his eyes on their black technology. If they could solve the problem of energy supply, the Drenii's interstellar warships and whatnot would be high-end. Compared to the Drenii, Azeroth's so-called latest diesel-flying battleship was nothing. Although Duque would protect the Drenii, he must also get his hands on their technology. But now was not the time. Duque could not bring himself to ask them to sell their bodies, land, and ancestral graves as soon as they entered the Alliance. Moreover, before confirming that the Alliance had the strength to fight against the Burning Legion, Willan, that old faker, would not give them any solid information. At this time, Duque and the others saw the mission officer of Glory Fort, and a damned dwarf with a particularly strong aura, the first person in the Alliance's mechanized forces, Bulang Bronzebeard. He was not the king, but most of the time, his authority was greater than the king's, because most of the Alliance's new weapons were created by him. Seeing such an important person walking over, how could Thomas not be nervous? He is. Imriel asked softly, and at the same time, half of her body hid behind Duque, and pulled on Duque's robe. Oh, the dwarf Prince Bulang Bronzebeard, an important person. But it's okay, he's easy to get along with, Duque replied softly. Oh, you're the one with an outstanding battle record, the one who led a small team to make contact with Shotrath City, Mark Dooku? I heard that you were also the one who surveyed and evaluated the terrain. Bulang came over and handed over a flat metal bottle. Needless to say, that must be Bulang's collection of strong liquor. Dwarves did not beat around the bush. Giving you liquor meant that they thought highly of you, and wanted to make friends with you. Friendship was deep, and one gulp was enough. Duke didn't say anything and gulped it all down in one gulp. His face was not red, and he was not out of breath. Oh! Mage boy, you have a good alcohol tolerance. Bulang gave a thumbs up. This is my special brew. It's 80 degrees, and a normal human would pass out in 2 mouthfuls. The Dalajan mages are very slow, saying that it will affect the brain, and they won't drink it no matter what. It's not interesting at all. Duque laughed. This was not his real body. All the food that entered the artificial stomach would be stirred, and it would not affect the body at all. It turned out that by controlling the artificial humans, one could pretend to be the god of wine. Duque smiled slightly. I was born. Chapter 1400. Some people were born unable to drink, and they would get drunk the moment they touched alcohol. There were also people who were born without getting drunk. It couldn't be helped. The enzymes in their bodies were especially active when they were born. The dwarves didn't understand this stuff, but they knew that there was a difference in alcohol tolerance between people. Bulang was amused by Mark's answer. Good. You have guts. I'll take you as my friend. Pfft. At that moment, Duque, who was playing a remote control game in Karazhan, burst out laughing. He controlled Mark and replied calmly, thank you. Mark Dooku, a puppet without self-awareness or even a brain, was born without the possibility of getting drunk. If Bulang foolishly competed with Mark in drinking, he wouldn't be able to win even if he drank until his liver exploded. Fortunately, Bulang wasn't so free to compete in drinking with a new little wizard in his eyes. Sigh. Such a magnificent piece of equipment is useless for pushing down thorns. What a pity. Bulang took out another bottle of wine, took a sip, and muttered casually. Oh, what else can it be used for? Duque asked casually. For large-scale projects, flattening the ground, or filling in the river. Filling in the river. This idea suddenly struck Duque's mind like a bolt of lightning. In Karazhan, Duque suddenly had an idea. He seemed to have grasped something important. Filling in the river. Reclaiming the lake. Wait, wouldn't this be? Duque was excited. Instinctively, he controlled Mark Dooku and grabbed Brian's shoulder, which was as thick as a wall. I got it. He said. I got it. We don't have to fight with Vash's Naga in the water. We can fill the lake in Terakur forest with soil and make a dam or something at the pass. The Naga can come or not if they want. Oh. Bulang looked very excited. He was also deeply shocked by this extraordinary idea. Good idea. This way, we don't have to care about those druids who worship nature. We can just use science to flatten everything. Yes. Flatten everything. Duque shouted. At the side, a group of people were looking at the two figures, one tall and one short, shouting at each other. The dwarf's secret chamber guards were not surprised, but Thomas was very surprised. Hoof looked as if he did not know what they were talking about and thought it was very impressive, and followed up with, oh. What they didn't know was that at this very moment, at the eastern edge of Zangarmarsh, bordering the Hellfire Peninsula, a battle to the death was going on. The muddy lake water was constantly surging, and from time to time, large blobs of blood would emerge. At the bottom of the lake where the visibility was terrible, all tactics and coordination were just nonsense. Although it was a probing battle, if he couldn't gather any information and reported the losses to the higher-ups, he really didn't know what would happen to him. Over the past few days, he had come to understand what kind of person Varian Rin, the commander of the Outland Allied Forces, was. Compared to the highly acclaimed Duke Marcus, Varian's actions were more unyielding. He could tolerate failure, but he could not tolerate cowardice. So Fandrel's Staghelm had to personally go into the sea, into the water to fight. After killing no less than 20 Nagas, Fandrel's heart turned cold. As a strong person who had stepped into the realm of heroes, his senses were stronger than all the other druids, so he could clearly feel that the corpses floating at the bottom of the lake were mostly Tauren and night elves. Less than 1 in 10 belonged to the Nagas. Compared with the flexible and tactically coordinated Nagas, Cenarian's druids were like babies. The Nagas did not even need to specifically lure the druids away. They only needed to make a simple diversion, and 2 Nagas could easily kill a druid together. As a last resort, Fandrel released a unique natural magic wave. That was the signal to retreat. At this moment, Fandrel's heart suddenly rang with alarm. Legend had it that dark energy had the ability to devour all life and souls to turn into its own power, but this was too exaggerated. Fandrel did not know if the opponent that suddenly appeared at this moment was using dark energy. He only felt a powerful invisible gravitational force at the bottom of the lake, and the water of the entire dark pool lake was gathering behind him. He turned around the sea lion's head, and was shocked to see a hazy, slender Naga with multiple arms 10 meters away, holding a strange longbow in her hand. The ornate longbow was covered in a dense layer of lightning, and Fandral could even see the intricate patterns on it through the murky lake water. But upon closer inspection, it was not lightning at all. After all, lightning traveled very quickly underwater, and it would disappear in a matter of seconds. It was a layer of translucent blue and white lines, either curved or straight, and those complicated lines looked like a magic circle engraved on the longbow. Using a longbow underwater gave Fandral a feeling of utter absurdity, yet the other party did it. Furthermore, the powerful aura emanating from the other party made Fandral's scalp go numb. His spine stiffened as if he had been electrocuted. So powerful. I'll die. I'll really die if I take an arrow from her. What a joke. Why must I, a druid who has yet to step into the realm of gods, face a demigod? Without even a tenth of a second of hesitation, Fandral turned and ran. Hee. Run, run. If I can't hit you, my 10,000 years of training will be in vain. The powerful demigod female Naga smiled seductively, and the voice of her soul spread in all directions, directly into Fandral's spiritual sea. Fandral was still desperately twisting his body. Speed up. Speed up. Speed up again. He did not know how long he had been swimming. Maybe it was a few seconds, or maybe it was just the usual time of 3 to 5 breaths. Anyway, the surface of the water was getting closer, and he could clearly feel the hope of freedom and vitality. An unprecedented excitement spread through every cell in his body. At this moment, Fandral suddenly felt his body hanging in the air. It was a feeling of emptiness where he could neither reach the sky nor the ground. With great astonishment, Fandral turned his sea lion's head again, and he saw a scene that made him feel incomparable despair. All the water in the surroundings had been sucked out in an instant. The female Naga, who should be called Vashj, had actually sucked away a small half of the dark pool lake's water, compressing it beyond imagination, and finally turned it into an arrow that was not very large, knocked on the bowstring of the gorgeous carved longbow. And at this moment, he, the great druid, Fandral's Staghelm, was actually suspended directly above a huge whirlpool. He was being pulled by an inexplicable force, or perhaps he was being held up, and he could not move at all. At this moment, the slender fingers of Vashj's right hand suddenly loosened, and the thin water arrow left the bowstring. Chapter 1401. Whoosh! Suddenly, the arrow lengthened. No, Fandral screamed. He understood that if he was hit by this arrow, it would be equivalent to being hit by half of Dark Swamp Lake. No. Or worse. Because the lake was a compressed version. At this critical moment, he showed the true colors of a hero-level powerhouse. He did not choose to turn into an eagle and try to fly away. Instead, he turned into a ridiculous bear. In this state, his armor was even stronger than that of the Dwarf King's deity incarnate state. Of course, it was only armor. In terms of magic resistance, the bear could not compare to the Dwarf King's avatar. But the bear's vitality was stronger. Then, he took the attack head-on. Just as the mark controlled by Duque and Bulang reached an agreement, thanks to the magic network transceivers all over the Hellfire Peninsula. Bulang was the first to receive the news. A human mage hurried over, but his eyes fell on Mark Dooku, who was standing beside Brian. The messenger looked a little awkward because this was a level 1 secret. I'll take my leave. Duque wanted to retreat after saying this. But Bulang grabbed Duque's wrist like a pincer, and he could not move. Bulang glanced at Thomas and the confused Hoof and laughed. Brat, do you think I don't know who you are? This was a pun. Duque did not expect Bulang to be so cunning. When Thomas heard this, he naturally thought that this mark should be a descendant of some great meritorious service. Or the illegitimate son of some big shot. In the circle of nobles, this was a normal thing. Imriel knew nothing about humans. Anyway, he was just a mascot. But to Duque, it was a different story. His impersonation of Mark Dooku was kept a secret from everyone except his own harem. The more people who knew, the easier it was for something to go wrong. He did not think that he would expose himself in a moment of excitement. At the end of the day, it was because his relationship with the three Bronzebeard brothers and Jurban was too good. For many days and nights, it was Duque, the transmigrator, who brought along these four dwarves who had a big brain hole and were passionate about practical matters, turning what was supposed to be black technology into reality. From blitzkrieg to rail transportation. From mechanized standardized mass production to flying battleships. Sometimes, even Duque's closest friends, the Windrunner sisters, were jealous and said that Duque spent more time with the dwarves than with them. At the end of the day, Duque was too familiar with Bulang. On this side, with Bulang's permission, the messenger reported the latest information. The Cenarian Expeditionary Army suffered a crushing defeat in the first battle. Sir Fandral Staghelm was ambushed by Vashj and was seriously injured. In Karazhan, Duque raised his eyebrows and muttered to himself, why didn't Vashj just get rid of this guy? Well, Duque did not speak, but Bulang did. Damn it, if he's dead, no one will scold our industry for polluting the environment. I mean, this is really unfortunate news. The group of people around him rolled their eyes. You've been exposed a long time ago. Bulang did not blush. Anyway, it was not the first time that the Bronzebeard brothers, who held the banner of the Industrial Revolution and shouted, want GDP, not environmentalism, had quarreled with Fandral in the alliance. Duque did not care about this kind of trivial matter. After all, the alliance was an equal organization that only required allies in military matters and tried to coordinate as much as possible in other matters. As long as they did not join the Burning Legion or other evil forces, it was their business how they did in their country, and other countries could not interfere. Besides, the Industrial Revolution in Azeroth was originally driven by Duque. In fact, when productivity had not developed to a certain level, there was no environmental protection or sustainable development at all. Ahem. I've gone too far. On this side, Bulang patted Duque's shoulder with his big hand. Well, it seems that it's up to us now. November of the 23rd year of the Dark Portal. In Azeroth, this was undoubtedly the month of entering winter. In Draenor, which had lost its core and was disintegrating, the weather did not change at all. The Taraka forest was still like summer. Due to the large number of allied troops entering the Taraka forest, the Fel Orc army that had previously besieged Shotrath city had retreated early under the command of Kilrog. They entered the Blade's Edge mountain area further north through Zangarmarsh that was controlled by Vashj. Duque was able to let Bulang's engineering team carry out the chain blockade operation under the cover of the Griffin Legion and the Dalajan mages in Stormwind. The so-called chain blockade, the biggest meaning was to block the enemy, so that the enemy could not go up or down, making it extremely uncomfortable. Specifically, it was to build a dam to stop the flow. If they followed the traditional method, then someone had to walk or take a boat to the middle of the water and sink huge wooden stakes all the way to the bottom. Then, using this as a foundation, they would throw sandbags or something to block the lake water and cut off the entire mouth of the lake. Finally, they would slowly build a dam. If this method was used in a peaceful place, it would not be too much of a problem. But in Dark Swamp Village, where strong enemies were watching from the side, it would be a little dangerous. Dark Swamp Village was located in the southeastern corner of Zangarmarsh. It was the core waterway that connected Dark Swamp Lake and the Taraka Forest's Hilmia Lake. It was a place with many small islands and narrow waterways, similar to a water village. Although the water was relatively gentle and shallow, when it fell into Hilmia Lake, there was an obvious big drop. To be specific, it was a large waterfall that was more than 100 meters wide and had an average drop of 20 meters. What do we do? Although he had sent scouts to survey the terrain and had seen the actual situation, Bulang still frowned. Duque, who was playing the role of Mark Dooku, had a card up his sleeve. He raised his thumb and pointed at the big guys behind him. Didn't I tell you to remove all the steam tanks and put stones on the turrets? Just drive the tanks into the water and sink them. As soon as he said this, the dwarves around him were shocked. Damn! There was such a suffocating operation. Bulang said, this will work. Anyway, the people operating the tanks have all been replaced by humans who can swim. It's not like your people are going into the water. Duque shrugged. Bulang finally understood. Using wooden stakes to seal the mouth of the lake was too slow. Once the Nagas attacked, the project would definitely be paralyzed. But if the entire steam tank sank, half of the mouth of the lake would be sealed on the spot. The tank with the turrets removed was like a large rectangular box. It was very convenient to stack more tanks on top of it, or to build the stones for the dam. In this way, the sealing of the lake could be done in half a day. When the lake water stopped flowing, it would be useless even if the Nagas came. They would not be strong enough to move these behemoths that weighed more than 30 tons. What a genius idea! How did you think of it? Bulang let out a sincere sigh of admiration. I saw it on TV when I was watching the flood rescue. Chapter 1402. When the water level was high, the sandbags would be washed away as soon as they were thrown in. The Celestial Empire didn't just drive trucks filled with rocks in. Sometimes, it was a ship full of rocks that sank in the gap and blocked the dam. Of course, Duque wouldn't say this out loud. Instead, he said domineeringly, the old steam tanks are going to be eliminated anyway, so I suddenly thought of reusing them. Duque's words were so reasonable that Bulang had nothing to say. If there was a shortage of iron ore, all the scrap metal would be thrown into the furnace to be recycled. As long as they had the manpower and resources, it wouldn't be a problem to refine a batch of high-grade iron ingots or even steel ingots. There was a precondition: manpower and resources. The iron furnace castle itself was a large mine. Although it had been excavated for 1,000 years, there were still no signs of it being exhausted. In addition, they had recently obtained large amounts of metal ingots from the tribe, copper from Durotor, iron from Stonetolan Mountain and Feralas, gold and mithril from the Thousand Needles Forest. All the ore had been transported to Theramore, smelted into metal ingots, and then transported across the sea to the Iron Furnace Castle, the largest factory in the Alliance. Because ready-made metal ingots were more useful, there was no place to use the old steam tanks made from low-grade iron plates. So when Duque suggested using hundreds of steam tanks that had been shipped to the outer lands but could barely be used due to the lack of steam pressure, Bulang was truly shocked. If Duque wasn't wearing this unfamiliar face right now, that would be even better. Bulang also knew that Duque was in trouble, so he waved his hand and gave the order to start. The mouth of the lake to the south of Dark Lake Village wasn't an area that Vashj focused on defending. After the soldiers of the Griffin Legion killed all the large lizards wandering near the mouth of the lake, the Alliance army began to set up large numbers of heavy iron horses in the waterway to act as fortifications. When 5,000 human infantry, 500 elven archers, and 200 mages formed a line of defense, the human engineers drove the rumbling steam tanks into the lake. It had to be said that this was a technical job that required a lot of courage. Of course, they could use iron rods to press down on the accelerator and let the tanks continue to sink into the water. But in reality, many things could happen before they sank. Would they go astray? Could it be that the water was too shallow and the steam tank was stuck? The air pressure in the outer realm was low, and all kinds of situations could happen. All of these required the pilot to use his own experience and skills to adjust. More than once, Duque had seen the tank soldiers from Stormwind. In order to be accurate, they would often wait for the tank to start sinking before jumping out of the cockpit like parkour. This made Duque shudder with fear. One east and one west, working in two directions at the same time, greatly increased the efficiency. In less than half an hour, a rough dam appeared in front of the Alliance soldiers. Wow! The engineers cheered enthusiastically. Keep it up, lads! Bulang shouted. For this battle, Bulang even tricked William into going to the eastern entrance of Zangarmarsh to inspect. As a matter of fact, Vashj took the bait. As William approached the surface of the water, the powerful Naga siren shot him with an arrow. This arrow was very strange. At first, it looked like an extension of a reflection in the water, and no one was alarmed. When everyone reacted, the sharp arrow made of water was already less than an inch away from William's cheek. No! Vala screamed and waved her dagger. She hit the tail of the arrow. It was useless. The feedback from the epic-grade dagger made Vala's heart fall into the abyss. The feeling was no different from stabbing a dagger into the water of a pond. Something that no one could have expected happened. Ever since he stepped into the outer realm, William, who had always been a berserk warrior with long swords, actually took out a huge shield that felt like a mountain at lightning speed. At the same time, 3 illusory golden shields revolved around William's body. This was the defense warrior's signature profession skill, shield wall. Humph. William let out a muffled groan. Even at the cost of this epic-grade shield being pierced, it still bought him time to dodge. William's entire body was almost parallel to the ground as he dodged the water arrow's splash by a hair's breadth. Tisk! A disdainful soul voice came from the water. William didn't come here alone. As the commander of the Outer Realm's allied forces, besides Vala and Brawl, there were also Solarian, Lilith, and other hero-level powerhouses beside him. Unless Vala was willing to give up her advantage in the water and run to the land to fight William and the others, she could only give up. In fact, not long after they retreated, Vala received information from the Dark Lake village. What? Good plan. Vala's seductive face flashed with a fierce glint. Let the Tidewalker pass. On the other side, in the south of the Dark Lake village, intense construction was still going on. A temporary dam formed by 4 huge steam tanks sunk side by side had already appeared in front of everyone. Using the tanks that had sunk into the water and were filled with rocks as the foundation, a large number of sandbags were thrown to the north of the dam. The originally turbulent water had now become a small stream. When the flow of the water slowed down slightly, Duque ordered people to pour cement into the water. Hee. In another half a day, even if Vala came personally, she wouldn't be able to deal with this dam. Boulang snickered. Don't laugh too early, Duque warned. Never underestimate an intelligent powerhouse. As if confirming Duque's guess, rumbling footsteps came from the north of the Dark Lake village an hour later. Duque and Boulang frowned at the same time. A scout came. Report. We've discovered a giant that seems to be a deep-sea giant. He's holding a huge anchor and is advancing towards the dam. There are hundreds of water elementals and close to 1,000 male Naga around him. There are many enemies, and we don't have many experts on our side. Boulang pouted. I know. Duque gazed into the distance expressionlessly. The Griffin Legion soldiers in charge of guarding the front were resting in 3 shifts. Only the 2,000 people at the outermost part of the formation were prepared for battle. The rest of the soldiers were allowed to rest, but they were all wearing armor and holding their weapons. Since there was enemy activity, they all took their positions and waited for the enemy to arrive. However, the battle this time was different from any of their previous battles. They were not standing on solid land, but on an isolated island that looked like a watery village. Although the water was shallow, Duque would never forget how terrifying the water attacks in the Romance of the 3 Kingdoms were. The places where the soldiers stood were all reinforced with sandbags and were at least 10 meters away from the surface. In this period of time, they even added metal components that resembled a wave breaker to the front of the soldiers. That's right, the greatest enemy of the soldiers wasn't the Naga, but the possible flood. Chapter 1403. The Naga army had arrived. Vast and mighty. It seemed that the alliance had more people, but the quality of the Naga soldiers was higher. Even the well-trained soldiers of Storm City, no matter what weapon they used, would find it difficult to defeat a Naga in a one-on-one battle. Racial talent determined the upper limit of an individual soldier's combat power. Male Naga had giant-like arm strength and impact. Female Naga had inherited the spellcasting ability of the Night Elves. The conversion ratio of Naga to humans was 1 to 5, which was a conclusion based on long-term statistics. Not to mention the unknown number of water elementals at the moment, and a boss-level underwater giant holding the line. The soldiers of the Griffin Legion were a little sweaty. This was not a battle of the same level. Once the fight started, it would be difficult for them to escape. But glory and discipline drove them to stand their ground. Every soldier could not help but move their fingers so that they could hold the hilt of their swords tighter. Bulang. Duque said softly. Yes. Bulang snapped his fingers. Suddenly, not only the Griffin Legion, but even the Naga noticed the change above their heads. They instinctively raised their heads and looked at the huge shadow in the sky that covered them all. It was a fleet of spaceships. First, 4 giant ships with 3-story gun decks and towering stern were descending from the top of the dark void. And in the middle of the airspace surrounded by them, 8 larger flying ships descended one after another. Unlike ordinary warships, their balloon-like appearance looked a little ridiculous at first glance. Judging from the appearance of only a single-story gun deck, this should be a transport ship. Every ship, including these transport ships, was bobbing up and down in the storm above Draenor, swaying left and right, as if they would fall at any time. Then, a large number of lightly armored dwarf knights could be seen hovering high in the sky above the 12 ships, holding storm hammers that were flashing with lightning. They were riding the griffins that they were proud of, and the little lightning arcs in the air formed a circle outside the fleet. It's our people. The flying fleet of the Alliance. The sudden appearance of the strange enemy finally affected the Nagas and the others. Even the leader of the deep-sea giants, Marogr Tidewalker, could not help but raise his huge head to look at the uninvited guests who suddenly broke in mid-air. It wasn't that Serpent Temple's troops didn't want to do something, but it was too high. These fleets hovering 500 meters in the air were completely beyond their range of attack. Immediately afterwards, the Griffin Legion soldiers received a new order. Emergency retreat. Everyone's expressions were very interesting. As infantrymen of the new era, they had all received artillery training. What they were told the most was how to make themselves stand out in the eyes of their allies in the sky and at the rear, so that their allies could adjust the firing parameters of the cannons and not hit by mistake. How could he have encountered such an order today? However, as the elites of Stormwind, even if the order for an emergency retreat was given, it did not mean that they would abandon their armor and flee. In an orderly fashion, they moved from the back to the front and quickly ran towards the high ground on both sides of the river. This scene left the Serpent Temple army a little dumbfounded. If it was a tribe that had fought many big battles with the Alliance, they would definitely understand on the spot that the Alliance was going to make a big move. There were only 2 choices left in front of them. One was to charge quickly and muddle their own soldiers with the Alliance's soldiers as much as possible, creating a chaotic battle. In this case, blowing up their own people was something that Duque would never do. The second was, run. The faster the better. Unfortunately, before the battle in the Outer Lands, Vasht's people had never interacted with the Alliance, and were unable to understand how crazy modern air raids were. In addition, the leader today was the brainless deep-sea giant boss Marogri. In the end, the group of Naga made the most idiotic choice. Like curious babies, they looked at the large-bellied ship above their heads as it opened its hatch. A large cloud of gray stones fell from the sky. What is this? Don't know. If they want to kill us, they should at least use stones, right? A group of male Naga who were not very intelligent showed the Alliance what it meant to be dumbfounded. Very quickly, they realized that something was wrong. The grayish-white substance on their bodies reacted to the water on their bodies. It was a terrifying feeling, as if one was suddenly thrown from a cool spring pond into a blazing hell. The psychological gap was accompanied by the sharp pain around their bodies. Every Naga could not help but wail in pain. They beat themselves madly, using their claws to wipe the dust off their bodies. However, it was useless. In order to display the characteristics of aquatic creatures, their bodies were mostly soaked in waist-deep waterways. However, when these gray stones came into contact with the water, they immediately produced a terrifying heat. Every water channel was like boiling water, crackling and popping. From afar, over 1,000 nagas and water elementals looked like glutinous rice balls rolling in sesame paste. Glutinous rice balls in the form of monsters. They used their strong bodies to struggle with all their might, but under the intense pain of the ultra-high temperature, it didn't take long for them to fall dead in the waterway. No. It was already a mud road, not a waterway. The quicklime quickly filled up every small waterway, turning it into a sticky, semi-solid substance. On the high ground on both sides of the dam, Bulang and the soldiers of the Griffin Legion were dumbfounded. Bulang's voice trembled. What kind of new weapon is this? When did it get here? How come I don't know? The Alliance's big explosions were all handled by Bulang. Duque shrugged. Nothing special. It's just quicklime. It suddenly encountered a large amount of water, and became like this. Quicklime was the most commonly used industrial raw material. It would mature after being wet, and was a typical coating material and adhesive for bricks and tiles. Bulang, of course, did not know, because this stuff was originally used to build blockhouses. Quicklime would produce high heat when it came into contact with water. For a certain transmigrator, this was just common knowledge in middle school. But for Bulang, who had never looked back on the road of explosions, this was obviously unorthodox knowledge. Bulang's tongue was hanging out, and his eyeballs were about to pop out of their sockets. His brain seemed to be unable to accept that such a strong Naga division was completely destroyed in a few blinks of an eye. Bulang's brain worked very quickly. If there was enough quicklime, then the crooked, dead lands of Zangarmarsh that ordinary people could not set foot in would all become roads. At this moment, the deep-sea giant boss Marogri, who was heavily injured by the high heat of the quicklime, went crazy. Chapter 1404. The condition of the ground was terrible. There was boiling lava-like stuff everywhere, hot and sticky. It was like walking in the crater of an erupting volcano. Marogri slipped and half of his body was stuck in the slurry mountain of slurry, which made him feel even more pain. Roar! Marogri tried to summon a water ball to get rid of the disgusting stuff on his body, but the surrounding water had all turned into sticky slurry. This stuff was beyond the scope of nature, so he naturally could not command it. Without magic, he still had a strong body that was unimaginable to mortals. His huge body that was 6 stories tall could be said to be unstoppable when he charged. After letting out a roar, he instinctively identified a direction and launched a violent charge. Originally, seeing such a formation, the Alliance infantrymen would probably be scared to the point of peeing their pants. If he had not been blinded by the limestone, a ridiculous tragedy was born. If he had charged in the right direction, whether it was the tiny human infantrymen or the few diesel tanks, they would not have been able to stop him. Unfortunately, he charged in the wrong direction. Dark Swamp Village was originally not directly under Vasht's territory. It belonged to a group of broken. These Dreenii who had lost their minds had to add the new label of unlucky, in addition to losing their minds. The brute force of the deep-sea giant boss was not something that their crude houses built with straw and wood could resist. Not only the houses, but even the huge stone mushrooms unique to Zangarmarsh were also affected. Mushrooms that were 10 stories tall and 20 stories tall were directly knocked over by Marogri. The berserk but blind giant destroyed everything he touched in a frenzy. Broken wood, thatch, and stone mushroom fragments exploded, splattering in all directions like rain. Fire! In the sky, the commander of the flying battleship ordered. The hatch of the cannon opened, and the cutting-edge cannons aimed at the giant, roaring loudly. However, most of the cannons missed. It was not that the Alliance's cannoneers were too bad, but the conditions in the outer realm were too bad. Without the core, it was already a miracle that Delano could still maintain an atmosphere that did not collapse. It was difficult to expect there to be any stable airflow or even air circulation in the sky of the outer realm. Because of the unstable airflow, all the flying battleships were like wild horses running wildly. No one knew which direction they would turn in the next moment. After all, the flying battleships were not birds of prey that could fly in the sky. Birds could instinctively adjust their body balance. On the other hand, the flying battleship could only rely on the helmsman's ability to make slow adjustments. To be honest, it was already a miracle for them to be able to fly into the sky and conduct an airdrop. Duque rolled his eyes. Clearly, in the irregular gales of the Outland, flying warships could be used to blow up huge fortresses and fortresses. It would be a joke to think of covering fire. Bulang couldn't bear to watch such a terrible bombardment. He snapped his fingers. The dwarf artillerymen who had been deployed on both sides of the dam immediately lifted the camouflage net made of ropes and large pieces of leaves, revealing the cannons underneath. This time, his aim was much better. As a cannon that had long been calibrated to shoot the elements, it could fire one shot in less than 30 seconds. The power of the new breech-loading cannon was also displayed at this time. The cannonball's initial speed was very fast, so fast that the giant boss had no time to react before it was hit. Just the first round of the fierce impact was enough to make Malogri stagger. Even with his thick skin and thick flesh, he could not withstand the bombardment of the 155mm cannon. In Duque's vision, a large flower of blood blossomed from the giant's shoulder along with the explosion. Perhaps in a place like the Serpent Cavern where they had to dive, they would have to fight a hero against a hero and kill him by force. But here, in the vast swamp, there were many ways to deal with this big guy. Malogri must die. Duque gritted his teeth. If he didn't die, he could use his giant anchor to destroy the new dam with brute force at any time. Once the Naga entered the Taroka forest unimpeded, the Alliance would be in trouble. After the first cannonball hit, there would naturally be a second, a third, an innumerable number of rounds. This was a battle between the new cannons and the old mysteries. Countless cannonballs collided with the majestic body. At that moment, the entire dark swamp village was shrouded in the glow of the explosion. In a trance, Duque seemed to see dark ripples of water appearing densely on Malogri's body. These ripples formed a layer of bright blue network at any time. Originally, it seemed that the sea giant had a chance to survive this wave. But at this moment, the Alliance hit the jackpot. A powerful dwarf bombardier smashed a 4,000-pound super bomb onto Malogri's head. Boom! The explosion caused by the 2-ton bomb completely enveloped the entire dark swamp village and spread in all directions. With the giant at the center, there seemed to be a moment of delay before a visible shockwave swept across the entire swamp. Woo! Mark Dooku wasn't Duque himself. Unless he wanted to use his life-saving skill, Ice Barrier, he could only obediently hide behind the enlarged Bulang who had activated Avatar. He wasn't the only one who had to hide. Even the retreating soldiers of the Griffin Legion had no choice but to crouch on the ground and use their rectangular tower shields to protect themselves from the flying sand and stones that came crashing down on them. Unfortunately, Duque had underestimated the power of the explosion. If it wasn't for Bulang grabbing him at the crucial moment, he probably wouldn't have been able to avoid the tragedy of being sent to the sky. This wasn't an exaggeration. Not far from them, more than 10 soldiers were blown away. The less fortunate ones fell directly onto the rocks beside the waterfall and probably died on the spot. Only half of them were luckier and fell into the pool below the waterfall with a splash. If it wasn't for the construction workers who hurriedly used poles and other things to pull them out, they probably would have fallen as well. Under normal circumstances, no one could swim in armor. Did he die from the explosion? Faced with Bulang's question, Duque really wanted to say, yes. Unfortunately, the answer was the opposite of what he wanted. While he wasn't completely unscathed, Malogri was indeed not dead. His huge body was sealed in an even bigger ball of water. To Malogri, this suffocating situation was like returning to his mother's embrace. His face maintained a ferocious expression. His eyes didn't open, and his mouth kept bubbling. Bulang and Duque's pupils suddenly shrank. Indeed, the huge water elemental beside Malogri that was 3 stories tall was very eye-catching. However, the focus of everyone's gazes was on the petite but charming female figure on the other side. Snake hair, a bow, a soft snake-shaped lower body, and an overwhelming evil aura. There was only one existence that fit this description, Vashj. Kakik. I really want you to enjoy the moment of victory. Unfortunately, I can't do it. After all, Malogri is one of the few decent subordinates I have. Chapter 1405. In a sense, Azeroth was also a world where blood and lives were used to prove that working together could kill all enemies. Elite monsters that one person couldn't kill, 2 more people could do it. Dungeons that one person definitely couldn't do it, 4 more companions could do it. Bosses that one person couldn't do it alone, a group of 39 bandits could do it. Apart from childbirth, which couldn't be sped up by numbers, there wasn't anything that couldn't be solved with numbers. Being able to kill enemies and protect subordinates was a lesson that every boss had to learn. If Vashj was on Duke's side, Duke would have to give her a good review. But Vashj was an enemy, and she made such an exaggerated statement in such a condescending manner. Duke wasn't happy. Didn't you say that my smurf could come over and act cool? You, Vashj, have already finished showing off. What about all the planning that I've done for so long? It wasn't that Duke didn't have a trump card, but the reason why it was called a trump card meant that it couldn't be played easily. This trump card was the magic net. As long as Mark Dooku existed, the magic net would cover the area. It was said to provide stable magical communication for the allies, but in reality, when necessary, it could become a special channel for Dooku to smuggle his personal goods. But Duke didn't want to use it now. Whether it was magical communication or magical power transmission, magical power traveled through the void, and the void wasn't a so-called superconductor that didn't have energy attenuation. How could it be easy for Duke to connect magical power from Azeroth through the dark portal and then cross the energy-poor Hellfire Peninsula? For every 100 units of magical power transmitted, at least 80 to 95 units would be wasted. If he wanted to send the Sword Emperor of the Twin Emperors over and display demigod-level power, it meant that Duke would have to use up half of the magical power that the magic net had accumulated with great difficulty. Just imagining that situation made Duke's flesh hurt. But Duke didn't have any powerful helpers. To hold Vashj back, Bulang might be able to fight with all his strength, but who was next to Vashj? The system immediately confirmed that Duke's thoughts were correct. The unstable Hidus was another troublesome water elemental boss. 3 of the Serpent Temple's 6 big shots had already arrived. Excluding Yusler, whose body was even larger and couldn't swim in shallow water, Vashj might still have 2 other bosses hidden behind them. What to do? Duke was worried sick. It seemed like William had unintentionally become a target, and the plan had obviously failed. If Vashj attacked, but she didn't want to waste the mana of the weave, what should she do? I'm also in despair. Just then, Bulang made an almost undetectable gesture, and the sorcerer in charge of magical communication immediately notified the captain of the flying battleship in the sky. Another 4,000-pound bomb fell from the sky. Swish, just the sound of his descent through the air was enough to make the distant Griffin Legion soldiers feel their scalps go numb. Duque sighed. Sure enough, what happened next was as expected. Plop. Plop. When the giant bomb, which was slightly larger than a carriage, fell 100 meters above Vashj, the entire bomb was suddenly wrapped in an even larger water ball. It looked as ridiculous as a gummy candy. Pfft. The water ball wrapped in the large bomb showed unimaginable elasticity. It actually fell from the sky and smashed less than 20 steps away from Vashj. Not to mention exploding, it didn't even make a sound. Duque and Bulang's pupils suddenly shrank. For some reason, Duque suddenly thought of a very classic saying, all bullets and cannonballs are just flying tools that fly a little faster. Yes. As long as one had the speed to eliminate its power, then all bullets and cannonballs were nothing. In the world of martial arts, only speed was unbeatable. It was simply too easy for a powerhouse to deal with a free-falling bomb. An unforeseen event that no one had expected happened at this moment. There was no taunting or signs of a fight. Vashj's left hand held her incomparably famous longbow among the players, and the 3 arms on her right actually made a saluting gesture at the same time. This time, Duque's already shrunken pupils suddenly shrank again, shrinking to the size of a needle. Memories that had been sealed for a long time were instantly triggered. I remember this gesture. In Karazhan, Duque's main body suddenly stood up. Of course he remembered, because he had returned to the War of the Ancients. During those days in Queen Azhara's palace, every maid of the queen had saluted him like this. At that time, his identity was still the Void Lord of the Infernal Affairs. Suddenly, Duke thought of a possibility, the maid, Suleika, whom he abandoned when Azhara's city was destroyed because of her half-heartedness. Could it be that Valeria was? This feeling was a bit absurd, but the more Duque thought about it, the less certain he was. That's right, in history, Vashti was a maid of Queen Azhara. Later, for some unknown reason, she left the queen and ran off to do things alone. Later, she joined Illidan, and in the end, she was killed by the Cenarian Expeditionary Army and mortal heroes in the Serpent Shrine Cavern in the Outland. This possibility made Duque shudder a little. This was not good news. Although he had left a contingency plan for Valeria, he did not know if that contingency plan had been successfully activated. He also did not know what Valeria's personality was like after 10,000 years. The Night Elves were extremely long-lived. Similarly, 10,000 years could completely change a person. One had to know that even Tyrande, who bathed in the moonlight all year round, had the guidance of a goddess, an adopted daughter, and a group of believers and an entire race to keep her busy, almost had her heart twisted. Not to mention those who were locked up in the darkness and suffering. Illidan was locked up for 10,000 years, but on the surface, he was still willing to fight for Tyrande. In the original history, he also wanted to play infernal affairs from the bottom of his heart, but in this life, no one could guarantee anything. Anyway, looking at how decisive he was in killing, he was not far from being a psychopath. Alright, let's change to Vashti. Let's say that Valeria was Vashti, but so what? In this life, Queen Azhara and the elite high elves who were loyal to her miraculously survived the disaster, but were similarly tortured by the aftermath of the energy released by the Well of Eternity. When Azhara's city was dragged under the roaring sea by the explosion of the Well of Eternity, the desperate elves had no choice but to accept Zatha's poison curse, and to survive, they had no choice but to accept their new form, becoming the snake Nagas filled with hatred. No one could guarantee that Valeria would not be like Queen Azhara, constantly expanding her own hatred and anger, and finally falling into a serious and irreversible state of madness. On the other side, seeing Duque's shocked expression, Vashti's face showed an intriguing smile. It seems that today is not a good time for a decisive battle. So be it, I will wait for your arrival at the Serpent Shrine Cavern with my strongest subordinates. After saying that, she seemed to take another look at Duque. Chapter 1406. It's her. Not her. Duque felt like his heart was being scratched. He was so curious that he was about to explode. He didn't know what to say about this karmic situation. A few years ago, he left. 10,000 years ago, during the ancient war, he abandoned Selija because she fell in love with her master. Although he didn't do anything to Selija and didn't have any psychological burden, he still sold out a subordinate. Duque watched as Vashti swayed her soft waist and her long and terrifying snake tail slowly left with her two huge subordinates. She submerged into the swamp in the distance and swam to the dark swamp lake further away. Duque suddenly seemed to have lost something. At this moment, in Karazhan's room, there was a sudden clang at the door. Duque suddenly turned around. It was Jaina. She came in with a plate of supper and didn't even notice that she had knocked it over. Jaina's face, which was always intelligent, was twitching in pain. Vashti. I found you. Jaina's voice didn't give Duque a feeling of resentment. But Duque could clearly feel the persistence in her that couldn't be pulled back. Duque's heart skipped a beat. Sure enough, time can make people forget many things. If Vashti didn't jump out, Duque would have almost forgotten how Jaina became the queen. The biggest reason Jaina didn't become the girl who sold out her father, who was despised by countless players in this life, was that her father, Daylin, died in the hands of Archimonde, who was crossing west to Mount Hyjal to destroy the Ghost Fleet. Jaina's big brother died in the mouth of the Red Dragon during the second battle of the Dark Portal. The second brother, Thanriad's family, and the destruction of the entire island of Kur-Tiras were done by Vashj and her subordinate, Naga, who joined Archimonde. Because Daelin was the king, the eldest prince, the second prince, and even the second prince's son all died, Jaina, the fourth in line to the throne of Kur-Tiras, became the queen. Now that Jaina was behaving strangely, Duque knew that this matter couldn't be resolved peacefully. Jaina, don't be rash. Duque flashed over and hugged Jaina. Jaina's delicate face froze for a moment. Then, every curve of her face softened, and she leaned her head into Duque's embrace. Her golden hair dazzled Duque's eyes. Hey, Duque, do you think that I used to hate my father and two brothers? Duque didn't know the answer, but he knew that Jaina just needed someone to talk to. So he didn't answer. Silence was perhaps the best answer. As expected, Jaina gently rubbed her face against Duque's chest. Strangely, Duque felt like he was petting a cat. I've never thought about hating my father, eldest brother, and second brother. Do you know? In the 2,800 years before the 15 years of the Dark Portal, there wasn't a queen in the Eastern Kingdom. I was indignant, but I always thought that my limit was to build a career after marrying you, to prove that I could be independent. A bunch of queens appeared during the third battle of the Dark Portal. Duque recalled that he was also a professional in creating queens. I know why my father treated me coldly in his last days. An outstanding princess was the biggest threat to a mediocre prince. I accepted all of this, left the sea that I loved, the Dalajan that I loved, and went to the elven forest. Jaina's eyes were dazed, as if she had returned to the time when she was 15 years old. Although it seemed glorious, it was actually extremely lonely. Actually, I had already accepted my fate, and surrendered to fate. I thought that was my limit. So when you let me manage Salamur, I was very happy, really happy. Because there was finally someone in this world who appreciated my ability, and not my beauty. What's more, that person was you, the person I had always longed for. Unknowingly, Duque felt a moist feeling in his chest. Jaina cried. I never wanted to be a queen in this way. Even if I really wanted to be a queen, it should be the Celamorians who trusted me, supported me, and were willing to sacrifice their lives for me. They should raise the flag that only belongs to me, Jaina, and offer me the queen's throne. Hearing this, Duque also smiled and gently stroked Jaina's head. What an ambitious queen. Jaina sniffled, sobbed, and revealed a bitter smile full of poignant beauty. Since the remaining people of Kur-Tiras need me, since my surname is Proudmoore, then I have my duty. Don't worry, I won't be hot-headed and abandon my people and the duty of communicating between the two continents to run to Draenor to settle scores with Vashj. If there's a chance, please be sure to kill Vashj and avenge my second brother's family. Duque was speechless. A moment ago, he was still hesitating whether he should verify Vashj's true identity or something. If she was really Seleka, then it was not impossible to capture her. After all, among Duque's subordinates, there were dragons that could fly in the sky and Emperor Kiraj that could burrow underground. He lacked someone who specialized in water battles. Not to mention the little Naga from back then, there was also the Murloc sage Magar, who was responsible for wholesale IQ among the mentally handicapped Murlocs. There was really no one who could fight. All right. Now, one of the core members of his harem, Jaina, had spoken. Even if Vashj was really Seleka, he could not let her go so easily. Don't worry, as long as I catch Vashj, I will bring her to you. You can steam her, braise her, whatever you want. Duque swore, completely ignoring the dark clouds that suddenly covered the sky outside Karazhan. It was as if a group of cultivators was undergoing a tribulation. Pfft! Jaina burst out laughing. She lightly punched Duque's chest with her small fists and coquettishly said, "What do you think I am? I'm not the Tyrannosaurus Rex in the crater." Duque suddenly felt really touched. Should he say that this was a woman he had taught since she was a little girl? This personality was many times better than the original Jaina in history. Jaina was a busy person. She ran over and circled around before leaving. As soon as Duque waited for Jaina to leave, he immediately opened a portal and ran to the moon goddess temple in Nasus to find the other person involved. The night elves originally had 3 leaders. Malfurion went to cultivate. Oh, no, he went to work in the Emerald Dream. Fandral Staghelm was thrown into the Outland by Duque. He had just been shot in the knee and vomited 3 liters of blood. He was still recovering in the Outland. Tyrant had the final say in all of Darnassus. Although Duque's surprise visit was more personal, the priestesses of the Moon Goddess Temple were used to it and quickly reported it. Duque met Tyrant in a side hall. Chapter 1407. Oh, what a rare guest. I didn't think that you, Duque, would actually come looking for me. But this is the Moon Goddess Church. As soon as the host and guest were seated, Tyrant's dignified, flawless, and holy face blushed for a moment. Act. Continue acting. Sometimes, Duque felt sorry for the night elves. The spokesperson of the goddess they believed in, the high priestess Tyrant, had already been fed to the wolves in order to win the War of the Ancients 10,000 years ago. Her moral integrity had been crushed in the process of Duque's evil fantasies. Ahem. Duque coughed dryly and put on a straight face. I'm here to talk business. Oh. Since Duque said it was business, Tyrant, who was dressed in priestess robes, immediately straightened her attitude and sat opposite Duque with her most flawless appearance. She raised her hand gently, her posture as elegant as a painting. Commander, please speak your mind. It's about the War of the Ancients, the time I spent with you in Azhara's palace. Before Duque could finish, Tyrant's face, which she had put on a dignified expression with great difficulty, immediately turned red. Damn it, you're still saying that you're not messing with me? I already said that this is the Moon Goddess Church. The goddess will definitely pay attention to this place. No. I'm talking about Selija. Duque said firmly. Tyrant's eyes widened, and there was some hesitation in them. After thinking about the latest reports from the Alliance, she immediately understood everything. You suspect that Selija is the current Vashj? Yes. Looks like you've made your choice. Indeed. Duque smiled bitterly. He had no reason to fall out with Jaina just to subdue an unknown Selija, Vashj. I understand. You're here to seek enlightenment. Perhaps. I'm someone who cherishes old friendships. If it's someone I don't know, whether he lives or dies has nothing to do with me. If necessary, I can easily destroy him. But old friends. Duque stuttered. He suddenly realized that being a leader was very painful, especially being the leader of the Alliance. Or perhaps it was because the situations he faced in the past were always black and white. Are you an anti-party? If that's the case, I'll beat you to death. You aren't going to go against the Alliance, right? As long as you kill the Burning Legion with me, everything will be fine. Duque could even forgive the beast men who had committed countless evil deeds, and he could ignore the existence of Orgrim and Anastrian. However, he felt uncomfortable killing a maidservant who had served him before. Tyrant spoke softly. The moon goddess, Elun, always taught us to look at problems from multiple perspectives. For example, although the Nagas and the fell orcs are our enemies, they are not truly evil. Tyrant's words shocked Duque. If the other radicals in the Alliance were to find out what you said, you would probably be criticized by many, right? Tyrant smiled and continued, be it the beastmen of the old tribes, the fell beastmen or the Naga, they are all beastmen. They came to this world or Draenor to seek land in order to survive. Although to them, humans, the current night elves, and the Draenei are all enemies, their actions are not evil. Their desires are essentially good. Since they are good, one day, when they realize the destructiveness of the Burning Legion, they will take on important responsibilities in this world. This argument made Duque's jaw drop. As long as one is an intelligent being, there will be conflicts due to all sorts of conflicts, and the factors that differentiate them as friends or enemies are benefits and losses. It is a pity that we are now in such an extreme era, an era of despair where we cannot survive without the Burning Legion being destroyed. Be it the moon goddess or I, we are not willing to think of building an alliance that only relies on strong combat power in such a situation. Because this will lead us to the path of evil. At the end of the day, we are not united just to defeat our enemies. We are raising our weapons for our comrades, and even the future of the entire planet. So, if there is a chance, be it you or Jaina, learn to forgive. After Tyrant finished speaking, Duque was completely silent. After a long time, Duque finally squeezed out a sentence, forgive. Tyrant smiled. After joining the alliance, I have always heard people say that the prosperity and power of the alliance today is forged through military force, the result of the great leader Duke Marcus's leadership. Is that true? Not at all. Duque was resolute. I have never felt that the alliance is solely due to my efforts. This is an alliance forged from the dreams of countless people. Countless people abandoned their leisure, and invested their imagination, energy, and physical strength into it. A mere Duke Marcus can't build so many flying warships, tanks, and attack every inch of land in Azeroth and Draenor. Tyrant's smile became even wider. Then I would like to ask, in the 2,800 years of the rise of the human race, did no one fight against the elves or dwarves? Who didn't fight? Where there are people, there is paste. The violent dwarves and Stormwind had a lot of friction, but after understanding each other, they became strong allies. After hearing this, Duque finally understood what Tyrant meant. Alright, in the past, people told me that the priests were all charlatans, and I didn't believe them at first. Today, I have finally seen it for myself. You've been beating around the bush for so long. It seems like you've told me everything, but at the same time, you haven't. Tyrant smiled like a flower, hee. You are a true demigod of Azeroth. You have no right to call me a charlatan. Pfft. He was used to the thinking of mortals, and didn't have that many thoughts of being superior to the rest of the world. Alright, I understand what you and Elune are trying to say. As long as there is anger in your heart, let's fight. Until one side is done. After that, I, the guide, will have to deal with the aftermath. Oh please, this is a death grudge. Tyrant sat down and leaned on Duke, rubbing herself against him. Duke Marcus, the only person in the alliance who has the aura of a legend, the man who can always make the impossible possible, the partner of me, Jaina, and other outstanding women. This matter depends on you. If you can't do it beautifully, how can you think that you have the right to be loved by the 7 noble ladies? Alright, charlatan is right. Duque replied impatiently. I really hope that one day, every race in the Alliance can create an ideal world without war. When that time comes, I won't have to work so hard, mediating disputes every day, and doing all sorts of things. Alright, I won't let you down. Chapter 1408. Tyrant sent Duque to the main entrance of the Moon Goddess's temple. Duque opened the portal and looked up at the bright moon in the sky. That was the light of the Moon Goddess. For the past 25,000 years, this light had shone on the land of Azeroth every night. That kind of gentle radiance that contained divinity, just one glance was enough to make one remember its glittering pride forever. Elune had witnessed the rise and fall of Azeroth. From the tragic slaughter of the Dark Empire to the shocking ancient war 10,000 years ago. She had worked tirelessly to heal this scarred world for a long time. The goddess Elune was respectable and praiseworthy. On the surface, Duque was here to communicate with Tyrant, but in reality, he was also greeting Elune. Regardless of whether Vashj succeeded or not, he had to report it to Elune. Since Tyrant had repeatedly mentioned forgiveness, it was okay. Sigh. Duque sighed softly. Elune was worried sick about Queen Azhara and the other fallen night elves. They did not believe in the goddess and blindly pursued power in their uncontrollable domain. In the end, they attracted the Burning Legion and played out a typical example of playing with fire. Not only did they harm themselves, but they also caused the entire continent to sink, and billions of lives were lost. No matter how one looked at it, Elun's heart could be said to be great. If these bastards were Duque's subordinates, they would have been killed long ago, and not even their souls would be left. Only Elun would be willing to forgive and hope to guide them back on the right path. Of course, Elun could not publicly issue an oracle to support Duque's actions. As the commander of the alliance, it was one thing for Duque to take in the Nagas as his underlings. As the only true goddess of the night elves, it was another thing for her to do it publicly. If this kind of guy who abandoned his compatriots and allowed demons to slaughter his compatriots could be easily forgiven, what would the night elves who had supported Elun for more than 10,000 years think? This was a major matter that would affect the foundation of the goddess's believers. Therefore, the goddess could not step forward and could only agree to Duque to do it in a tacit manner. Back in Karazhan, Duque immediately followed his instructions. "Oh, Vashj, are you Seleka?" "Oh, it doesn't matter. There's no future for you to follow Queen Azhara or the Burning Legion. Hurry up and throw yourself into the arms of Master Duque. Master will bring you along to show off and fly." It wasn't that Duque hadn't thought about it. Once his aura of a tortoise rose, Miss Vashj would immediately bow her head and call him master. Unfortunately, he could only dream about it. None of the ancient gods ran a charity, so how could Enzos treat Queen Azhara like a treasure? Not to mention Vashj, the queen's maid. The queen was almost begging for food, so how could the maids be any better? In any case, regardless of whether she was Celia or not, she couldn't escape the dark history of being thrown into the pitch-black, boundless deep sea and suffering for 10,000 years. Let's get rid of the foreign aid first. Duque sighed slightly. In the days that followed, the alliance advanced on 3 fronts. The Horde gathered almost all the mobile forces that could be used and ran to attack Ochinton in the south of Terakar Forest, trying to open up the road to Nagrand. After realizing that he couldn't deal with Vashj well, William had no choice but to lead the main force of the alliance to expand in Terakar Forest. In order to ensure supplies from the Hellfire Peninsula to Shotrath City, they first took care of the Raven Nest at the west side of the Thorns Rampart rocky grounds and beat the Crow people inside until they were covered in feathers. Then, they entered Turam at the south side of the Thorns Rampart rocky grounds and took care of the former Drenii who had turned into a lunatic. Finally, the alliance began to build a new stronghold in the south of Terakar Forest near the Moon Shadow Valley. Originally, this stronghold would be named Aurelia Stronghold, to commemorate the heroine Aurelia who had disappeared in the Outland War. But in this life, Aurelia had never gone to the Outland. Moreover, the next person to guard the stronghold would be the 4th sister of the Windrunner family, Lilith, who was better at fighting in the jungle. Thus, this stronghold was renamed Windrunner Stronghold. The battles on these 2 fronts were fought in accordance with the rules. There were no surprises, and naturally, no surprises. The entire alliance's attention was attracted by the battle in Zangarmarsh. The other side said that it was led by Bulang Bronzebeard, but everyone knew that Bulang was a short-tempered dwarf and couldn't fight such a delicate multi-threaded attack. Time entered December. After consolidating the dam at Dark Swamp Village Waterfall, the Alliance mobilized more than 50 flying ships of various types from Azeroth. Only less than 1/5 of the warships were left, and the rest were all simple flying transport ships. 2 large propellers, coupled with the new diesel engine and a huge metal cargo hold that looked like a goldfish with a big belly, that was a transport ship. The Alliance and Horde weren't good at fighting in swamps, right? Alright, I'll fill the swamps. Lakes and everything else will be filled up. What seemed like a fantasy was nothing in the face of the Alliance's incomparably powerful transportation capabilities. A smaller flying transport ship could carry 500 tons of sand. A larger one could carry 3,000 tons. From day to night, these transport ships did nothing but work in 3 shifts. Under the cover of the flying warships and other air forces, they loaded sand onto the mountains of Hellfire Peninsula. Then the first step was to fill up Dark Swamp Lake, which was located between Nagrand in the west, Terakar Forest in the south, and Hellfire Peninsula in the east. I'm not as good as you in water battles. Alright, now I'll force you to fight me on land. Let's see how you Naga can act. Facing a transport ship that could drop sand from 500 meters in the air, the Naga side really couldn't do anything. In the outland where magic was chaotic, no one's magic could be blasted out more than 500 meters. There were so many bosses in the Serpent Shrine, but none of them could fly. They could only stare at the Kiraji bugmen flying around in the sky and the small boss Shatura. The water in the swamp area wasn't deep to begin with. After a few rounds of dropping sand, the waterways leading to Dark Swamp Lake were all filled up. Unless the Naga had the ability to deal with sand better than the Alliance. Whether it was eating it and pulling it into the void, or using magic to make it disappear, as long as they couldn't deal with the sand, they had no choice but to accept the cruel fact that the area they controlled was decreasing every day. When the Alliance used sand to divide Dark Swamp Lake into 7 or 8 pieces, the efficiency of filling up the lake increased. Under the cover of the Air Force, the fearless dwarves drove diesel bulldozers and started filling up the lake. There was no solution to this kind of shameless fighting style. As a last resort, on the 12th of December, the Fell Orcs once again appeared in the original filling area of Dark Swamp Lake. Unexpectedly, when the Fell Orcs were more than a kilometer away from the water's edge, a group of Griffin Knights and Hippogriphon archers immediately rushed up. And then, there was no then. Chapter 1409. Duque's actions were obviously taking advantage of Illidan's lack of air force. This method was quite extreme and could be said to be shameless. However, it could solve the problem that the Alliance wasn't good at water battles and didn't have enough experts. If it was a complete nature, it would always be reclaiming land from a lake. Once there was a flood, it would be a big problem. Not Delano. As a planet whose core was already broken and in a half-destroyed state, it was already a miracle that it could maintain air. The situation in the outer realms could no longer be explained by science. Since there weren't so many rules and restrictions, Duque could naturally use his imagination to create trouble. After a month, Dark Swamp Lake and its surrounding areas, which span nearly 100 square kilometers, had been completely filled with soil. After repeated tests by the gnome craftsmen, the ground met the requirements. However, Illidan's men did not know what was going on. On the 25th of December, nearly 100,000 Fell Orc soldiers and ogres dressed in coarse beast skins crossed the shallow waterway near the lagoon in the middle of Zangermarsh and entered the current Dark Swamp Plains. Originally, their attack was to destroy the Alliance's lake-filling project. Who knew that along the way, the human sentry towers were all empty? As the sentry towers were constructed with reinforced concrete, even the ogres had to expend a great deal of effort to destroy the half-built sentry towers. Using a hammer to hit those sturdy little bunkers was even more of a loss. Often, even if the hammer was broken, it might not even make a hole. However, the Beastman army was still advancing forward, and their progress was unbelievably smooth. Even Kargath Bladefist, who was supervising the battle from afar, could not help but raise his eyebrows slightly. As one of the few tribal chiefs who had seen the power of the Alliance's artillery, he had no choice but to deal with the orders from above timidly. If he had a choice, he definitely wouldn't choose to attack the Alliance in such a terrain. It was a pity that Illidan wasn't here. The orders of the second-in-command of the organization, Vashj, wasn't something that he, the newly defeated Beastman leader, could resist. Although Kargatha's temperament was irascible, he still carefully divided the 100,000 Fell Orcs under his command into 5 echelons. With a loose formation that was almost equivalent to a human line of soldiers, he allowed the Fell Orcs to advance forward. To the evil Beastmen, who were still in the era of cold weapons, it could only be said that there was no other way. Of course, concentrating troops would allow them to display their close combat prowess, but the Alliance's cannons weren't to be trifled with. In one morning, they had advanced nearly 20 kilometers. It was more like an armed parade than a march. Kargath became even more agitated. Right at this moment, a muffled sound of thunder came from the distant sky. Human cannons. Get down! Kargath shouted almost immediately. When being bombarded, quickly get down, or else there would be a higher chance of being hit by the shrapnel and reaping your life. This was common knowledge in the Alliance army, and many orcs in the new tribe of Azeroth knew about it. The problem was that these blockheads in Draenor didn't understand at all. Moreover, after drinking the evil demon's blood, his intelligence began to break through the lower limit. Lie down. What do you mean lie down? That cowardly warlord of his couldn't be scared, right? Ha ha ha. Not only the fell orcs in the distance, but even Kargatha's personal guards were loudly mocking Kargath. This was the inherent thinking of the orcs, who were behind the times. Before they saw real technology and schemes, they didn't know what was scary. Perhaps they were not intelligent enough to understand this. In any case, there was only one word in their dictionary: reckless. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Black Pearl, Duque, Hoof Imriel, and Bulang looked into the distance together. Sitting on this flying warship that could barely be dismantled and transported over through the dark portal, and then reassembled into the largest flying warship, the stability was greatly improved. If it was any other ship, Duque was afraid that his hoof would vomit, and he would kneel before seeing what he wanted her to see. Hey. Mark. Didn't you say you wanted me to see something new? Firing cannons again, what's the point? Come to think of it, I've been burying steaks so much that I want to vomit. Imriel swayed the little tail on her butt. For some reason, Duque had the urge to play with the tail. Of course, he resisted. This was a taboo for the Draenei, especially the females. In response to Imriel's ridicule, Duque smiled. At this point in time, Imriel was still very inexperienced. She was practically a newbie who hadn't even left the beginner's village. Throwing her to the front lines to fight with the orcs, even if Duque was willing, Valen would feel the pinch. He might as well send her to bury the magic net node pillars. The elements in the Outland were too chaotic, and it was not easy to maintain the orderly circulation of the elements. Before connecting with Shotrath City, if the magic net in Azeroth was the gigabit fiber broadband before transmigration, then in the Outland, it was the pitiful old 256K dial-up water pipe. How could it not be widened? And not having enough nodes meant that there was not enough Wi-Fi. Not having enough transmission distance meant that Mark Dooku's movement area was restricted. This was unforgivable. The reinforcement of the network these days was not only to increase the magic net's capacity, but also to replace that damned 100 megabit router with a gigabit-class enterprise router. Of course, the most important thing was that Duque had finally found a new source of magic for the magic net. That's right, it was that Neru from Shotrath City. It was impossible for Duque to learn from a certain fellow and treat the Neru as a simple little son, a magic juicer. But where there was a Neru, the weather was generally good, and the elements were orderly and peaceful. After obtaining Valen's consent, Duque got Solarian to set up a new elemental absorption spell formation in Shotrath City, absorbing the 4 major elements around Shotrath City into the magic net. It was no exaggeration to say that with the magic support of Shotrath City, Mark Dooku's current strength was more than twice as strong as when he first entered the Outland. He was 100% a Radiant Moon Archmage, puppet. Speaking of which, the hoof had done so much work, and Duque was also happy to tease this amusing hoof. He raised his hand and pointed into the distance. Look, the plane, fly, plane. Duque blushed. A slip of the tongue. Look at that mass of dark clouds. If Duque had not mentioned it, not many people would have known what the volley of cannons was for. A large mass of dark clouds gathered above the muddy ground of Dark Swamp Lake at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then, accompanied by a golden bolt of lightning, heavy rain came pouring down. In a few breaths, the originally soft ground had turned into mud. Duque waved his hand in a cool manner, like a conductor waving his right hand in a beautiful arc. I call this, artificial rain. Chapter 14:10. Artificial rain. The technology of the Alliance was so advanced that they could even control rain. Regardless of what was going on, it was so high class. Hoof crossed his fingers, and his tail spun like an electric fan. His pair of bright eyes were like the starry eyes of a starchaser. What What an amazing feeling. Hoof used the most realistic performance to demonstrate what it meant to be amazing even though he did not understand it. On the side of the ship, Bulang did not care. Yo, do. Mark, no matter how you make the little girl happy, even I can't understand it now. Why can't even I understand it now? What are you going to do with this rain? You even called Sar here. Duque had long since discovered the movements of the fell orcs. This time, he personally called Sar here in the name of his main body. At this moment, in the mushroom forest not far below, Sar was waiting for orders with 5,000 beastman warriors. Orgrim, Duque told me to send people to receive a large number of fell orc captives, but I saw that the alliance did not send many troops. Can Duque really do it? Sar asked. Never underestimate Duke Marcus. He is a miraculous man. His miraculous thinking had long since been proven in many battles. Since we are allies, let us wait patiently. He never disappoints his allies, Orgrim answered gruffly. Perhaps this was a kind of sorrow. They had to trust their former enemies. But it was precisely because they were enemies that they understood each other the best. Sar and Orgrim were extremely conflicted. In the sky, on the Black Pearl, Duque smiled faintly. Magic can do many things that mortals cannot. In fact, science can also do many things that magic can do. For example, this. Duque waved his hand, and instantly, several flying transport ships lowered their altitude and rushed towards the front of the fell orc army. Enemy attack. This time, no one laughed at Kargath Bladefist. Because as long as one was not blind, they could see that those big-bellied ships were sprinkling something black in front of the fell orc army. What is that? Imriel blinked. Duque shook his head, as if he was possessed by Zhu Guliang. As a general, one must know the heavens above and the earth below. Otherwise, he would definitely be killed by the enemy. Well, Imriel, what wind is it today? Imriel blinked again. I don't know. Duque rolled his eyes. Old Willen had never taught this hoof how to judge the direction of the wind. Duque sighed. It's easy to know the direction of the wind. You just need to throw a light object into the sky and see where it falls. Then, you'll know where the wind is coming from and where it's going. Oh. The hoof was a good student and also a student that made teacher do vomit blood. Because after the hoof agreed, it actually picked up a pebble from the deck and threw it into the sky. The pebble flew to a height of 2 meters above the deck and naturally fell straight down. Imriel got the answer. She patted her chest and said confidently, I know. The wind is blowing up and down today. Advantage or disadvantage? What F** king upwind or downwind? There was actually such a mind-numbing operation. Bulang felt that his brain was lacking oxygen. Duque felt like a middle school physics teacher was being scolded by a dog over and over again. Duque stretched out his twitching hand and threw a feather into the sky. Naturally, the wind from the east blew the feather to the west. See that? That's what I call a lighter thing. Well, the sun rises from the east, and it's morning, so it's the east. Before Duque could finish, the hoof had already hit him 3 times. The pebble is not light? I think the pebble is very light. The sun in the world of Draenor rises from the west. Why can't I think of it as the left and right winds? Du vomited 3 liters of blood. Sargeras, Archimond, Nesario, Nefarian, and Galineros, these powerful enemies that made the world tremble had never defeated Duque, but the hoof did. Damn, could it be that he had met a fake hoof, Imriel, in this life? Although Duque did not think that Imriel was retarded, wasn't it too difficult to train a problem child? All right. I'd rather choose to launch a suicidal charge against the Burning Legion. While he was nagging, the Alliance casually fired a few fire arrows and immediately rolled up a terrifying 3-story high wall of fire in the east of the entire Fell Orc army. Ho ho ho. There was no need for combustibles. The black oil residue that fell from the sky was the most terrifying flammable thing. Any Fell Orc who dared to rush into the wall of fire would be burned into charcoal by the fire that had just been ignited. As the transport ship continued to release oil in mid-air, the fire continued to spread forward along the course of the transport ship. In that moment of distraction, the sea of fire had already formed a U-shape and surrounded the fell orc army from the east, south, and north. The line of soldiers that was originally 3 kilometers wide was now compressed by the fierce fire. "Don't be afraid." Kargath tried to stabilize the fell orcs who were starting to run back. At this moment, the Alliance warships in the sky began to fire. Dozens of artillery shells landed at the forefront of the fell orc vanguard and exploded right in the middle of the 100 or so infantrymen gathered there. With a series of loud explosions, the fell orc army was instantly covered in blood and flesh. It was not just artillery fire. Even more flying ships flew above the fell orc vanguard and dropped 500-pound bombs. The artillery shells and bombs opened up a large series of craters on the ground. The stones that were blown up and the stone mushrooms, along with the green severed limbs, fell like hail on the heads of the surrounding fell orcs. For a moment, screams and groans of pain were heard. In the face of the fire and explosions, the defeated army that had been chased out of the Hellfire Peninsula by the Alliance not long ago remembered the horror. Although the evil demon's blood made them violent, it was the instinct of most creatures to fear fire. The morale of the fell orc army collapsed. They did not care if there were still troops behind them. They turned around and ran faster than rabbits. The unexpected also happened at this moment. The land that had no problems when they came and would not leave footprints when they stepped on it had all turned into mud under the heavy rain. At this moment, it was even more terrifying than the mud. What made the orcs even more uncomfortable was that countless steel ropes suddenly fell from the sky. The ropes themselves did not have much lethality. The thick-skinned fell orcs were at most dizzy from being smashed. What happened next was more terrifying. Perhaps every transmigrator had this kind of experience. They put the earphone cable in their pocket and in a few moments, it became a mess. The situation now was similar. These ropes, which were supposed to be used to fix the ship, were easily mixed with the mud and became the most terrifying capture attack. Countless fell orcs huddled in the mud that was less than 4 kilometers wide and rolled around, fighting each other. Often, when one of them got up, the rope on his leg would trip another fell orc. The scene was extremely comical. In the distance, Sar and Orgrim were simply dumbfounded. There was actually such a thing.